Hello and welcome, dear distinguished linguists, dear experts and audience.
Bachtale, mișto avilan,
And
manusha kai rodinen kai keren rodimata pe shiba.
we welcome you at the Safeguarding Our Romani Language International Conference.
Savore kate sam te arakhasamen pe conferința vaș sartekera sarakipe vași romani shib. Siek mașcarte mutni conferința.
Welcome, Mr. Schockenbrook, Director of Anti-Discrimination.
Avilas, henazvi raieske Schockenbrook, Kotaro Consiliul la Europa, ko sa vosi šerutno ando vaši diskriminația, vaš ando departamento vaši diskriminația.
And Mr. Halvax, Dieter Halvax from the Graz University's Plurilingualism Research Unit, and
Dieter Halvax, Kotaro Graz Universiteto.
Zatreanu,
Mihaela Zatreanu, ce șunel pe mișto la cu microfonul.
Of Romani Language Reform Project.
Savisi coordonator ca vaš o proiecto vaši romani shib.
Arts and culture. I think we are starting with a small technical difficulty as the translation is simultaneous.
Siek problema tehnica ni, enel I timeia Unhaus. Sos que siamen simultano boldipen, translația pe romani, hai pe anglicani shib.
Okay, I wait for just 20 seconds until...
Nora, ești pe canalul greșit.
Me sunt pe Russian, cai cam este vo. Pe penal romanes, na?
Nora, mă auzi?
Da. Tu mă auzi?
Te auzim bine și în romani și e bine.
Sunt în romani, sunt bine, mă aude...
Nu, ești pe canalul greșit, trebuie să te reconectezi, cred. Nu ești... A zis Agota, m-a
mă
sunat.
aude domnul
Diana,
Sarău.
unde e?
Mihaela, dar auzim bine.
Norica, ești pe engleză. Ești pe canalul de engleză.
Eu sunt pe Russian. Aici la mine, eu sunt pe Russian. Ok, ies și intru din nou. Eu am bifat Russian.
Okay, so I will wait.
Problema.
Norika, we need to ask you to be quiet until the colleagues place you on the Russian channel. And meanwhile, I think I will continue with the consecutive translation if you are not able to get on the other channel. I would like to welcome everybody in these very special and uncertain times, and thank you for joining the European Roma Institute for Arts and Culture at the conference Safeguarding Our Romani Language International, coming together, an international gathering. ERIAC is a membership-based organization. Let me just take a look. Okay, our translation is also working. It's very nice. So I have to also say that the translation is central to the current conference. This is a conference on Romani language. I apologize for not addressing everybody in Romanes, and I would like to point out that you have Romanes translation already available. If you look at the language options below the participants list, you will see that we have English and Russian. And unfortunately, this conference platform does not have Romanes. Actually, neither one of them have them. This is why we chose Russian. And if you choose to listen to the conference in its main language, then you stay on the English channel. And for those of you who would like to listen to the Romani translation, please go to the Russian channel and make sure that you turn off the general sound of the main conference. Otherwise, you will hear both channels. So as I said, I welcome all of you. I thank all the linguists, experts, and the audience coming together today. And I would like to open the conference by sharing with you ERIAC's position of why today we are coming together and why this is important. So in the beginning of 2019, ERIAC membership and management began discussing and designing ways forward for preserving Romani language heritage and to fulfill the general need in Europe for Romani language education tools. In 2020, in frame of the current international outreach program that ERIAC is organizing, we began the ERIAC Romani Language Initiative to create activities that feed into the policies of the European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages. This project, this international project, is supported by the German Federal Foreign Office. And within ERIAC, we have the privilege that Mihaela Țatreanu is leading and coordinating the ERIAC Language Initiative. The ERIAC initiative contains efforts with the long-term objectives of building on the existing results and make use of the curriculum framework for Romani developed by the Language Policy Division of the Council of Europe back in 2008, as part of the Council of Europe's comprehensive approach to Roma and traveler issues. We continue the international work on the Common Romani Language with international experts with proven experience in the field. We develop teaching materials based on the curriculum framework for Romanes to support the language relearning needs of Roma individuals and also to organize trainings for Roma language teachers. The outputs of these initiatives are envisioned as the following: a database of Roma language teachers, translators, and interpreters, a map of networks of international Romani language education, and a Romani language textbook, the level A1. ERIAC established a collaboration with the language education experts of the Goethe Institute and the University of Graz to develop and produce the printed and electronic format of Romani language book for adults, A1 level. The Council of Europe's curriculum framework for Romani, developed by the Language Policy Division, is the guiding policy of the collaboration, which also invites the Roma experts who contributed to the elaboration of the Romani curriculum framework. The textbook is written in the Common Romani, General Romani, and before being published, it will also be reviewed by European Roma language specialists, speakers, and multiple Romani dialects listed in ERIAC's Romani language experts database. Today's conference aims to bring together the most relevant experts and practitioners of Romani, educators, academics, linguists who engage with linguistics research, development of teaching materials, and so on. Departing from the notion that Romani language heritage is at risk, the conference will aim to establish a space of discussion to support the development of the Romani language at international level, to promote the recognition, preservation, development, and cultural political harmony and synthesis for the future of Romani language. I call all of you today to focus not just on the differences and dialects and the definitions of the locals, but consider a transnational, general, and synthesized way forward. I hope we will learn a lot today. Thank you already for coming, and let's continue the conference. Please, Mr. Schilkenbroek, I pass the word.
Thank you very much, Timea. I hope you can hear me. You can? Good. Madam Chairperson, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it is a real pleasure for me to welcome you to this important conference organized on the occasion of the World Day of Romani Language, which the Council of Europe Secretariat is very pleased to co-organize and to co-host with you. In member states of the Council of Europe that have developed an educational policy on minorities, for example, on the use of educational material, Roma are often the only minority for which no educational tools exist, as there is no kin state to provide them. This makes it all the more important, in our view, that Roma themselves record, construct, develop, and organize knowledge of their history, culture, and language to be able to maintain and affirm and develop their identity. Language is probably the strongest factor when it comes to the development and maintenance of that common cultural identity. Now, for more than 50 years now, the Council of Europe has worked to protect and promote the human rights of Roma, with the first Parliamentary Assembly recommendation on the topic of 1969, the first Committee of Ministers resolution in 1975. Those early texts dealt mostly and focused mostly on improving the social economic situation of Roma in Europe. However, already 20 years ago, the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe recommended that opportunities to learn mother tongue should be offered to Romani children at school. And another recommendation of the Committee of Ministers 9 years later included provisions on training of teachers for teaching of and in the Romani language. Then let's move forward to 2010, the Strasbourg Declaration on Roma, which gave a very important new impetus to work of the Council of Europe on Roma, and which still guides us in many ways in our work for our activities. One of the priorities there was the commitment of states to take measures to foster knowledge of the culture, history, and languages of Roma and the understanding thereof. After that Strasbourg Declaration, we saw a growing need, a growing recognition of the need to address anti-Gypsyism in Europe and to raise Roma self-esteem through the promotion of Roma arts, culture, history, and language. And to this end, and for these reasons, the Council of Europe, we supported wholeheartedly the establishment of the European Roma Institute for Arts and Culture, ERIAC, in 2017. And we also supported the Institute ever since. For example, through our earlier thematic action plan on the inclusion of Roma and travelers, which ended last year. The Council of Europe is, of course, committed to continuing this support through our new and current strategic action plan that was adopted earlier this year, especially through work we envisage to promote Roma history, culture, and language. Also supported by a recent decision and recommendation of the Committee of Ministers, recommending member states to include the history of Roma and travelers in school curricula and teaching materials. But the Council of Europe is not only about setting standards and adopting texts and developing policies. We also contribute to the promotion of Romani through the European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages that you already mentioned, Timer. The Charter is the only convention worldwide that is specifically devoted to safeguarding traditionally used minority languages. Romani is protected under this Charter in 16 states. The Committee of Experts of the Charter regularly monitors the application of that treaty in practice. And Romani has been in the focus of many of the committee's evaluation reports and recommendations to the states parties. This process has shown how important the Charter is for Romani. For a number of reasons, Romani has been traditionally used only within the Roma community. However, without the support of institutions such as the school, the media, any language will encounter difficulties to survive and develop in the longer term. The Charter promotes the use of Romani in different fields of public life. Although there was some initial hesitation in different Roma groups in Europe, this approach appears now to bear fruit, as Romani is increasingly taught at school and university, used in broadcasts and in social media, as well as in cultural activities. And I'm very pleased that a bit later in our conference, Professor Vesna Crnic-Grotic, chair of the Committee of Experts on the Language Charter, will introduce to you those Charter provisions in more detail. Ladies and gentlemen, despite our long engagement with Romani issues, the educational systems in Europe are not yet fully inclusive, and Romani children and adolescents continue to face many challenges. The recommendations I mentioned earlier are clear about the principles that should shape educational policy, and the outcomes that policy implementation should achieve. However, they do not concern themselves with policy aspects that are really shaping classroom practice. I am therefore very pleased that later in our program, Ahmed Murat Kilic from the Council of Europe Education Policy Division will present to you some guidance and a proposal related to the role of the Romani language in the educational inclusion of Romani children and adolescents. Ladies and gentlemen, a very concrete example of Council of Europe and work on the Romani language is the work we carry out in the Ukraine on the codification and teaching of Romani. Many of the estimated up to 400,000 Roma in Ukraine speak Romani, mostly in different dialects. According to an online survey conducted by the project Protecting National Minorities, including Roma and minority languages in Ukraine, most Romani speakers are bilingual, Romani being used primarily within the extended family and close community. 58% of respondents say that there is no possibility to learn Romani at their place of residence, and 99% express the need to learn Romani in schools. However, in Ukraine, the Romani language is neither codified nor taught at school. It is worth recalling that here that Ukraine has taken a number of steps to amend its legislation in line with international standards and has stated publicly its readiness to meet the educational needs of Roma and other national minorities in their mother tongue. Following a request by the Ministry of Education of Ukraine, the Council of Europe project that I mentioned assisted the Institute of Pedagogy of the Academy of Science to set up a working group on the codification of the Romani language. This group work is led by ERIAC in cooperation with the Council of Europe. And I'm very happy that my colleague, Zemfira Kondur, from the Council of Europe office in Kiev, will later on present you this project in more detail. A last point, Timea, you already referred to the important work done on curriculum development and the need for teaching and learning materials. And we're very pleased that the work you do on the Romani textbook at A1 level that you mentioned is so solidly founded on the Council of Europe's work on the curriculum framework for Romani. These are very important initiatives. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have a very interesting program ahead of us, and I thank very much ERIAC also for putting all this together, and I wish you all very interesting and fruitful deliberations. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Director Schottenberg. I also would like to thank you for emphasizing that the conference today is already a united effort between the host organizations, the Council of Europe and the University of Graz and ERIAC, and also the experts, the distinguished expertise that we have with us today could only be possible with these united efforts, not just to inform policy, but also to develop common future practices. And I now pass the word to Dieter Halbach, the sociolinguist at the University of Graz and head of the Plurilingualism Research Unit, the host of this conference.
Okay, thank you, Timea. I have also problems to pronounce plurilingualism, so it always breaks my tongue. But this tongue twister, we owe to the Council of Europe. Thank you very much for inviting us. So, as partner organization of this to organize this conference, our contacts with the Council of Europe go back very far. Our contacts with ERIAC are very new, and it's a pleasure for us and an honor for us to be involved in this. Some words to the Plurilingualism Research Unit. For me, it's a social-linguistically based socio-political project which deals with multilingualism, plurality, and human rights. And with respect to this background, we work on topics like urban and regional multilingualism. So we document really the multilingualism historically in the region we live and beyond. So one of our partners is Multilingual New York, where they have 640 languages documented. Here in Graz, we have 150 documented, among them Romani. This is one of our strands, and the other strand, what we do is language documentation. And in language documentation, we mostly work with UNESCO. We are responsible for the new World Atlas of Languages UNESCO is currently preparing, and the World Report on Languages, which will be issued next year. And in language documentation, beside of this general aspect where we work for the languages of the world, we also concentrate on some languages, and I say always we concentrate on the Iranian and Indo-Aryan languages of Europe. The Iranian languages we work with are Kurmanji and Sasaki. This is the one strand. The other strand we work, and this is our old work we already do since 30 years, is Romani, where I have where Susanna Bodnarova, who came from who graduated from the Prague School of Romani, let's say this, one of the last disciples of the late Milana Hübschmanova. To her, we owe a lot in this context. Is running this, and what we are doing there is we are still working in documentation and somehow as a service institution or a service organization for Romani NGOs. So documentation, we are currently doing lexical work on various things. You know, this insufficient but only a multidialectal dictionary of Romani Romlex is based in Graz. We are doing research together with the University of Helsinki and with Paris. So Kimmo will be one of the next ones. He's my project leader currently there, but Susanna does the work. And we are also running a known series on Romani related matters, where I'm lucky now, and to tell this to this group, I found the legacy of the late Lev Cherenkov in Switzerland, and we are now able to publish some of his dictionaries, what he did, and some of his text collections, together with the Roma Foundation in Zurich, with Stefan Lederich and all these people. This is one of our parts. The other part is that we collaborate with Romani organizations since we started in the early 1990s. And first of all, with Romano Centro in Vienna, and also with my co-Romani research groups, which are the Burgenland Roma, which turned of a German Burgenländer halbwegs, a German Romani Burgenländer halbwegs Horvat, as they call me sometimes. And this is one of our new projects now, that we were approached by Austrian Roma, mostly by the Roma of Burgenland, and they asked us, together with other minority groups like the Slovenes and also the Kurds here, to produce teaching materials from them, quite different from what ERIAC is currently doing, because they want apps on their mobiles and for their computers to bring the language among young people. And so this is one of our service providing stuff where we are working in, and I'm looking forward to get new fruitful ideas during this afternoon, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dieter Halvac. And I pass the word to Veljko Kajtazi, member of the Parliament of Croatia, and also our honored Barba Lipe Academy member for the European Roma Institute for Arts and Culture.
La ciotto marogeve, Bach sa stipe sa tumenje. Nice tumenje che denma prilika che šajva čara po satemesko divese romanice bako, angle kalisara, a vime se vi o član Kataro ERIAC. Ako sa veni žanin, me smo Veljko Kajtazi, deputanto ane Croația. Tai viegdom aven maje sasteta veste. Mangal kamera tu meje va ka men katane Croația katare 2000 tai inyato beșgia kana amen veci deși ek beș chara baro symposium katare Roma catare Roma, ta catare romanici, mai but cotete, siamen la ce teme, ta but la ce po teme, catare romanici, sarche già. Nice vi samungre amalienge, pralienge romenge, che senza giacana pe sa amare giacana conferenze, o nostro simposio, tra classe sabi amare linguistora Roma, amare istoričara Roma, onda amare sikadine ani škola sociologora, amare novinara, čak se sa amare Roma che ceren bare buča e čavorenđe. Vijek dronaj sa legge che de bon sarà poiro doprinos pe romanici. A che manga che penav o satmensko divese romane cibako inițiativa sa catare calițara ta catarmande 2008 beș amene putardam jek alavari catare romano ta croațiaco romanici. Kini vola sa kova alavari kani sardam, ni misli sardam kaka čeragači but bari buci e romenci catarici. Tu benjamin che putardam ovviamente vi due predmetorora hanno fakulteti i eksi catare romski jezik 1 i 2 o duito predmesi književnosti kultura Roma hanno filozofski fakultet. Kova che se me butlo šalo, ako vasi che najprije vertana profesora che si redovito nego si izvanredno, a men catane Croazia siamo due profesora che si redovito hanno filozofskom fakultet che čaren erumistika. Erumistika također putardam, така че манга che pena mese but bahtolo che zadam sa che sabe buča che putrata che c'era kate amende ane Croazia. Akova che c'edam da mai bari buči, akova si ane 2010 beș che UNESCO prizni sarda o žive Cibako, gdje kanče che samo men but bahtalepe ga sabe buči. Tako te ja meni čadila, ma men želam vađaj dalje. Ja kanči ke manga ke benav ke si amen katinde panč forora ke putarde panč parkora, taj si amen kupre skulptura po satemensko dives Romani Cibako. Kola skulpture te kola parkora putardam ano Zagreb, putardam ano Belu manastir, putardam ano Beličev, putardam ano Kutina, taj putardam ano Ludbreg. Manga ke benav tu venđe amen trudijamen, taj čera bare buča sugod še i maj but kana si o pitanju čib taj Roma. Take, kate kaj se mesem kate anjek tan ke si biblioteka, kate ne si amen mai se panč bilje pustikora, sai pustikora che si moton katare čib romenđe, moton katare kataro samudari pene romengo, taj katare kultura, taj romenđe. Znači, sa kala pustikora che si amen kate, che si amen. Sa temanga vađe, varaso che vađaravto me džakova, che si već amen kate ane Croatia sa manglune, taj već amen prizni sardam o sa temesko divese Romani Cibako. Ake, me ruggeri saraftumen, mulima tuenje, che sa savoko shail, che dol dumo, ta che pritiskil, che aver parlamento ra isto gja che priznain Cibako žive, sar che čerdama men kate ane Croatia. Ta isto gja sar putardama men kate parkora, bilo bi bud bi avola sa lače, ja kanček bi tumen antumare tana che šaje putren ga save parkora, che šaje kardon ano 5 novembro. Kova che se mlošalo, ta che se bud barvalo, a kovasi che sarsavo bež che šajčera o Cibako žive sa majlačo da majlačo. A bež, iako si korona, taj si amen cara problemi, ali amen cava cacera da mai baro barvalipe, ja kančika cacera o Satimesko dives Romani Čibako ne samo na Zagreb, nego bi Petrin Tana, odnosno njih regija, kja kardol Osječko-baranjska županija, taj Petrin Forora, Vijano Beliše, Vijano Belomanastir, taj Vijano Valpovo. Ko te cacera Petrin žive pe Romani Čip. Ja kažem, magak meratovim, znači nije čadilam, taj non stop čera bud bare buča. Taj magak vađa keva čara, kova si možda jako bitno, a kova si kaj amen, ka te sarsavo beš sjemen butlače teme, naki sjemen butlače teme, nego vikova ke čara barvalipe, a kovaci ke kola teme stvarno sprovodiljen, taj čaljen, a ne pustikora, jano kindipe. Kovaci butlače, sose, mame na štu konike penola menđe, sarke bačerena menđe gađe, tumen pisani trag. Akram meni konik na štuke bačerola menđe, se men katani kalisara, se men katine maj bud se pinda knjige, pustikora. Znači, kovađan gljope, znači pekla deš beš, znači ano beš po panč pustikora putra. Kova si stvarno bari mašinerija. Ake o profesoru Marceli Vovšaj bačerol da majlače sodi si pare jek pustika ke putrela, taj ke kljol a njeg beš, a na amen a njeg beš čera majcara panč. Ja kažem, agak menate kola si vi kvalitetno pustikora, znači najbilo so. Ja kažem, ke naštu majma konike penola menđe, tu men pisani trag. Na, a men sjeme na kanal pisani trag. Tak ja kažem, agak menap bud se lošalo, ke še sadem ke davtumen kasave informacije po Satimesko dives Romani Čibako. Ta kanano fundo, agak ke mu kaptumen je bud bak taj sa stipe, taj sam gre romenđe, kaj god, kaj si, bičalamljenje obahtalo o Satimesko dives Romani Čibako. Zato mena venmanđe sa steta veste.
Yes, thank you for the contribution of Member of the Parliament of Croatia, Veljko Kajtazi. I will pick up two thoughts of Veljko Kajtazi to open today's conference, as he was the last speaker of this introductory panel. Number one is how Mr. Kajtazi emphasized, and our speakers emphasized, how language and Romani language plays an integral, central role in preserving Roma heritage, culture, and Roma identity. And number two is also very important, and we are very proud to have such distinguished Roma experts and contributors to the conference today, as well as non-Roma linguist experts and educators, researchers. But Mr. Kajtazi also emphasized that there is a privilege of our era, which is that we can depend on our well-educated intellectuals in saving and preserving Romani language and also shaping the future of this language together. So I pass the word to the next panel, Status of Romani Language in 2020, moderated by Gilda Horváth, journalist and a board member for the European Roma Institute for Arts and Culture.
Thanks a lot, Timea, Derbenbachtale, Romale. I'm very happy to be here, and as we are all very short with our time, I will also not take a lot of it. So our second session today is about the status of Romani language, because in order to talk about the future of our wonderful Romani chip, we have to talk about the present status, and I'm very happy that we have magnificent, distinguished experts to give input in this panel today. So first person to speak is Mrs. Ms. Professor Vesna Krinic-Grotic, Chair of the Committee of Experts of the European Charter for Regional Languages of the Council of Europe.
Yes, hello, and I hope you can hear me. I think you can see me at least. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting me to this online conference dedicated to the Romani language. I can see some familiar names and faces on the panel. So hello, Kimo, hi there, a member of the expert committee. My task is rather difficult to present you the charter with respect to Romani in 5 minutes. That was my task, and as it was already pointed out by Mr. Schockenbroek, the Charter for Regional Minority Languages is still the only international treaty dedicated specifically to the protection of minority languages in Europe as the cultural heritage of Europe. Together with the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities, also a Council of Europe treaty, it is one of the only two existing treaties dedicated to this matter. Both treaties are in force since 1998, so we have celebrated 2 years ago 20th anniversary, and we have also taken the stock of the achievements so far. To say the field of application of the Charter are the languages traditionally spoken on the territory of the state party by a number of speakers smaller than the rest of the population and different from the official language or languages in that state. Migrant languages are excluded from the application of the Charter. In addition, the Charter makes a distinction between territorial and non-territorial languages. So both territorial and non-territorial have to be traditionally spoken on the territory, but the non-territorial languages are usually dispersed all over the country and they don't have a specific territory where they are mostly used. In the explanatory report of the Charter, Romani is listed as one such language. Okay, I'm getting translation now, sorry. Can you exclude the translation to Romani, please? Okay. The Charter, such languages, the non-territorial languages, enjoy a little bit less of the protection offered by the Charter because they don't have this specific territory where most of these measures can be applied. But still, they are covered by the so-called Part 2 of the Charter that brings objectives and principles of the Charter, and that is Article 7. And Article 7 brings these principles and objectives with respect to all public life manifestations of the language, public usage of the language, and it also brings the non-discrimination clause, which is specific in this context because it really refers to the unjustified distinction between the use of the official language and the minority languages of that country, and also it requires states to work proactively on the elimination of discrimination in media and also in the field of education. So this paragraph, this Article 7, allows for the flexibility also to adapt the Charter's provision to these non-territorial languages and to protect them as an expression of cultural wealth. The Charter has so far been ratified by 25 out of 47 member states of the Council of Europe, which is not that much. The Framework Convention has been ratified by 39 out of 47 member states of the Council of Europe. These 25 states have to provide protection to every regional or minority language that fits the definition under Article 1, but they are also free to choose some languages to be covered by some additional specific provisions under Part 3 of the Charter. That is the most specific feature of the Charter, the so-called menu system, that states are free to adapt their ratification instrument to the situation in their country and to various languages spoken in their country. As Mr. Schockenbroek already pointed out, 16 states parties to the Charter are also applying the Charter to Romani. Some of them decided to provide additional protection under Part 3, such as Bosnia and Herzegovina, Germany, Hungary, Montenegro, Poland, Serbia, and Slovakia, but with rather, I'm afraid to say, poor results. At the time of ratification, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, and Montenegro declared that they would apply the Charter in areas in which Romani is in official use. However, Romani is in fact not in official use in any municipality of these countries, so therefore it is not applicable. In Germany, Romani is also protected under some Part 3 provisions all over the country, but more specifically in some of the Länders. But in some, however, the speakers did not allow their language to be taught publicly. So the Romani, as the language of the German Sinti and Roma, is kept, so to say, secret for the speakers of the group, which creates a certain problem for the committee of experts, because we invite the authorities to provide at least some education to those speakers who so want. And that is not a unique situation for Germany, but also for some other countries. In some states, Romani is spoken by more recent immigrants, for example, from former Yugoslavia, and is therefore not covered by the Charter, as it is considered to be a migrant language. Croatia is still the only country that has used the opportunity to make a reservation excluding non-territorial languages, and thus also hitting, so to speak, Romani. And despite the repeated demands and promises by the authorities to withdraw this reservation, this has not yet happened. The Committee of Experts of the Charter is very much aware of the socio-political situation of the Roma and consequently of Romani. And therefore, we try to put Romani in the focus of our reports, especially the non-discrimination part and raising awareness of the traditional presence of Romani in these countries. And we try to also inspire or to tell the authorities to codify Romani, because that is sometimes presented as one of the reasons why more couldn't be done for Romani, because the language is not standardized. But we ask them to codify the language in collaboration with the speakers to enable its promotion and use, especially in education, media, and public life. Thank you very much. I hope I kept to the time given. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for these very, very important informations. So to wrap it up, it sounds like the Charter is not able to cover many parts of our language reality. So it is pass the word to our next expert with the very important topic of the contribution of Romani linguists to the harmonization of Romani. Professor Kimmo Granqvist, Professor of Romani Studies at the University of Helsinki, Finland.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And actually, but before I start, actually, I would like to share my screen to show PowerPoint. Oh, just a second. Oh. Okay, I will make it without. How do I share my screen now? I know a little bit here. Okay, here. Okay. So I assume you can now see my. Okay. So actually, Romani linguistics is a discipline that has a history that dates back to the 18th century. Very many important milestones were reached during the 19th and the early 20th century. And there was an increased interest in the Romani language since the enlargement of the European Union in the 1990s. And this resulted in the consolidated scholarly collaboration and intensive activities such as the international conferences in Romani linguistics, and which started in 1993, and a number of large-scale projects dealing with different, for instance, with different Romani dialects, and nowadays with Romani social linguistics. So let me point out some terminological issue to start with. Harmonization either means unifying dialects belonging to the same language in order to produce one common standard language. That's the definition I found for harmonization. And then this is sometimes interchangeably used with the term standardization, which is a natural development in a speech community to adapt a kind of to have a standard language, or an attempt by a community to impose one dialect as a standard. These are two different terms here used. And I will start with, actually, because quite a lot of actually the harmonization or standardization endeavors have been coined with creating a writing system. So there have been few attempts to create pan-Romani writing systems. Quite usually they have been hampered by significant differences between Romani dialects. However, Marcel Courtiere had proposed a model for orthographic unification of Romani during the 18th and 90s. Well, some countries, some authors still use it, but it hasn't really, but it's not used really internationally by. And then there's a kind of Pan-Vlach alphabet, which Hancock in 1995 refers to a kind of at least English-based orthography. But most typically, harmonization actually has been taken there at national or local level. And it's here where quite many linguists have participated in. I start here by mentioning the developments in 1920s in the Soviet Union, where Romani was recognized as one of the languages of national minorities. There was a number of books were actually published. Over 200 books were published in Romani at that time. And since then, many linguists actually have been active in questions of harmonization, or for instance, maybe starting from Milena Husmanova, who was already mentioned in Czech Republic in the 1960s.
Mai canto, siamo
And then, of course, a part where linguists have contributed quite a lot of actually to language documentation or dissemination of harmonized Romani varieties have been through grammars. Romani linguists have been producing large numbers of descriptive and even prescriptive grammars of Romani dialects during the years, especially after 1990s. Some linguists have produced Romani textbooks using harmonized forms. But I could, for instance, mention Georgi Sarau, and even for instance, myself, I have written a couple of textbooks of Finnish Romani. And also, of course, linguists have been producing Romani dictionaries, which have disseminated harmonized forms of Romani. Here I could, for instance, mention maybe Martina Horniakova's dictionary of Romani, phraseological dictionary of East Slovak Romani, and definitely, and even corpora could be mentioned, and IT tools. These have been developed, for instance, in Graz, and I myself also played with kind of automatic morphological analyzer some decades ago. So another way where linguists have played a crucial role in dissemination of harmonized Romani have been, of course, teacher training, participation in teacher training, curriculum work, and teaching Romani. Here I would like to mention, of course, the Qualirom project, which was led by Dita Halbaks in I think it was in around 2010 to 2013, I think, of 2014, where lots of classroom teaching materials was produced, and also curriculum for Romani teaching. And of course, many of the Romani linguists teach Romani at different levels at universities and so on, and by that way disseminate kind of harmonized Romani. Then, of course, linguists are users of Romani. They are writers and translators. Linguists produced materials in Romani for websites. And to conclude with, I would say linguists also use Romani in mass media, and I think there might be kind of attempt to sometimes to use harmonized Romani when we speak Romani in radio, or when we write journal or newspaper articles in Romani. So I guess I will conclude here. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for this input on the work, very important work of linguists in trying to harmonize our language. Everybody can see that this, with all our languages and dialects, is a very complex kind of work. It's like trying to nail water. So we thank you for the depth of information, and I would like to pass on the word to Helena Sadikova, Head of Romani Studies at Charles University from Prague, about language preservation and the Common Archive of Romani Language.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everyone, dear colleagues and friends. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me for this event, and actually for organizing such an important event, joining so different important parties that do have a stake in how Romani is preserved, developed, and supported. It's a great honor to have the opportunity to speak, even though for a small moment here. First of all, please let me say a few words about the Seminar of Romani Studies in Prague, as this gives an important context to the background that I come from and the way that we use and work with the language and think about its promotion and support here in Prague. Our Prague Romani Studies Seminar has been mentioned already twice in the short introduction. It was established by Milena Hipshmanova, who just Kimo mentioned a few seconds ago. And what we do is that since 1991, so almost 30 years now, we are offering university education in the program of Romani Studies. We offer BC and MA degree in Romani Studies, concentrating on the language, history, and culture of the Roma on the European continent, but focusing especially on Romani communities and populations on the territory of Czechoslovakia, or former Czechoslovakia. Apart from teaching the language, we also do research in all the three mentioned domains. We somehow also try to develop the legacy of late Mrs. Hipshmanova, whose focus was always on the perspective of the Roma and on the work in close cooperation with the Roma. Which means we, apart from teaching and doing research, we also really try to have outputs that are practical, for practical use for the community of the Roma and Romani speakers. We use language in our daily activities while working on the topics that we work in teaching and in research. There is a large number of outputs that I could name, just to list a few. We are developing online dictionaries of Romani. We are concentrating on the North Central dialect of Romani, which is the dominant dialect spoken on the territory of former Czechoslovakia. But in the teaching, we also do courses. We do have courses on Vlach Romani, the Lovari variety that is spoken in this territory. We are developing different teaching tools in cooperation with the Council of Europe and Graz University, but also on our own. So for example, to those that are teaching Romani, we have developed a very small interface in the Quizlet application for North Central Romani. So if you want to use it or have a look at it, I very much invite you to do so. We also participate in the publication and edition of different texts in Romani, as far as our knowledge can help the support of the publication of these texts. And we also work in close cooperation with the Council of Europe on the different issues. For example, we are part of the monitoring of the Charter and its implementation as far as Romani is considered in the Czech Republic. We are also in close cooperation with the colleagues in Slovakia and support the developments that regard Romani in there, the harmonization, standardization, and inclusion in the educational system. So much for what we do in here as far as language is considered. Now, please allow me just a few thoughts on the preservation topic that I was asked to somehow cover in a very few moments. And I will link a bit with what was already said about the Charter of the regional and minority languages. First of all, it's a pleasure that we have such a document and monitoring system. And what I personally do appreciate and what I think is the crucial change in the perspective and approach to the minority languages is the idea that languages are actually part of, minority languages are part of the cultural heritage, our common European cultural heritage, which means a loss of a language is a loss for everyone, which very much, I think, shifts the perspective of the protection and support of minority languages, including Romani, as a right of a member of a national minority, whereas this perspective shifts it to a common cause and strive for everyone. Basically, if we lose a language, we all lose in our culture, richness, and heritage. So this is a very important initiative and input for the different parties that can take part in the support and preservation of the languages. On the other hand, I think what should be respected in any initiatives that do somehow support the protection of minority languages is actually the fact that it is an individual right of every speaker of a language if he decides to choose to use the language in daily communication or not. Basically, even though we think languages are an important part of the cultural heritage, we cannot force speakers to use the language if they choose not to. And this is exactly what is, I think, the crucial way of coming and approaching the idea of protection of the language. As I think our common goal should be to basically achieve a situation in which Romani speakers enjoy a free choice when they decide if they use Romani or not in their daily communication inside their communities, inside their families, or outside in the public space. A few remarks on the situation of the Czech Republic, and I think even though it is specific to our country, the situation is quite similar in other European countries, and especially in other European states that are actually parties to the Charter, which is the fact that a large part of the speakers of Romani abandons the language or has already abandoned it for different reasons. as part of our sociolinguistic research that we have conducted a few years ago, actually 10 years ago, I would like to highlight 3 different reasons of these speakers for abandoning the language, which I think are significant for what we should focus when we think about the preservation. First of all, people abandon the language for reasons which include, in general, stigmatization of the language, as well as, of course, closely linked with the stigmatization of the Roma, which is linked to the general situation and status of the Roma inside different societies. Second of all, what also makes the speakers, at least as they reported in our research, abandon the language, it seemed, was a lack of knowledge or information on the language itself. Basically, there is no knowledge or very little knowledge on the grammar of Romani, or on the fact that actually grammar is that Romani has a grammar. And somehow this links to the idea that Romani is something of a lesser language, a smaller language, a language that is not really a language, and a language that doesn't have any practical employment or use outside the daily communication inside the family or outside the communication with other speakers of the Romani. Third aspect, which is quite an important and which links to the other sessions that we'll be hearing this afternoon, is that many of the speakers said it's the school that makes them use Czech in our background rather than Romani. Basically, they said we speak Czech to our kids so that they do not have a problem when they enter the school. So far, for what we have gathered from the speakers 10 years ago, basically what I want to say is that the situation is quite not satisfactory, if I put it very lightly. Basically, there are severe limits to the idea of a free choice of the Romani speakers today in the Czech Republic, but I think and know that in many other European countries, this is the same situation. So basically, what can be done for the protection? And I'll be speaking here in very general terms and apologize for it, basically is enhance the status of Romani and Roma inside the societies. And the way we can enhance the status of Romani is exactly to support activities and initiatives that do support the real use of the language in daily life, but also in different public and social domains and lives. Basically initiatives and activities that go beyond the symbolic use of Romani. We know that there is quite a lot of projects and events that only use Romani as a title without ever having to do anything with the use of the language as a language of work and as the language of the project that is actually being supported.
Please come to an end.
My last remark, and that actually goes back to what has been said about the schools and what will be said about teaching in the schools. Quite often Romani is introduced into the school system as part of the support of the language from the state sides. Exactly, the charter is what actually asks the states to do. The other reason is also basically it is a right of a member of a national minority to use the language inside the school system. Nonetheless, I think we should also, when considering Romani inside the school system and its preservance, it should be noted that the introduction of a language into school doesn't really lead to revitalization or preservation as such. And second of all, when introducing Romani into school, we should think about the educational perspective and the educational benefits that such an introduction actually includes, which means we should think about not so much about the protection of the language itself, but maybe much more about the benefits that do come from the presence of Romani inside the school systems for Romani speakers, non-Romani speakers, but also the system itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Ms. Sadikova, for this input and an appeal to be brave to speak Romanes and against the fear and stigma connected to it in order as the best way to preserve our language. And I very dynamically and fast pass on the word to the moderator of the next panel, which is Anna Mirga, talking about current practices in Romani language education.
Hello, everybody. Lacho Jives, te aven Bartale Raumale. I would like to ask my panelists, my guest speakers in this panel on current practices in Romani language education to turn on their cameras. There will be, we are making a short technical test at this moment to make sure that the translations are perfectly working. Mr. Ahmed Murat Kilic, could you please turn on your camera, and also Mihaela Țatreanu, if you could also turn on your camera, and then we can immediately start with this panel. Yes, thank you very much. So it is my pleasure today to moderate this session, focusing on review of current practices in Romani language education. And since we are already a few minutes behind, I will immediately give the floor to our first panelist, Mr. Ahmed Murat Kilic, Program Manager at the Educational Department of the Council of Europe. He will be giving a presentation on Council of Europe guidelines on the role of Romani in the educational inclusion of Romani children and adolescents, a plurilingual education in action. Mr. Kilic, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to address such distinguished guests, and I would like to thank ERIAC for giving me this opportunity. If you allow me, I will share my screen, my presentation.
Please go ahead.
I believe you see it now. Okay, in 2018 and 19, the Council of Europe commissioned a group of experts, some of whom are already in this meeting, and Helena just a few minutes ago addressed to the audience. She has been involved in that work to look into the Council of Europe's existing policy documents and try to see if there are any gaps and is there any room for further development. And so they looked into the Council of Europe recommendations, white paper on intercultural dialogue, and some of other documents, why we needed the policy guidelines after all having, at least 3-4 recommendations, because educational inclusion of Romani children and adolescents still remains a major challenge. And the previous Council of Europe initiatives leave a gap between high-level principles, which are mentioned in the policy documents, and the classroom practice. And the guidelines try to address the gap by focusing on the role of Romani language and adopting the Council of Europe's plurilingual approach to language education. And as you see on the screen, and I mentioned, there are sources of policy guidelines. Some of them I mentioned. I would like to draw your attention to the last two, the Council of Europe's concept of the learner as an autonomous social agent and the plurilingual approach to language education. This is something we have been trying to promote in the last 20 years, and we will try to simplify and promote it further in the coming years. And the guidelines introduce 5 principles to guide the policy development, which are very important. Educational inclusion is a fundamental human right. So, and language plays a central role. If you don't know the language of instruction, or if your language is not recognized as a mean of communication, this is the tricky part, then you don't have access to education. So you can, yes, the language of instruction or schooling is important, but also schools, to some extent, should provide an opportunity for learners to bring in their plurilingual repertoire into the classroom. So the teaching of Romani should be inclusion should benefit pupils from majority as well as minority communities. That means while we are focusing on the Romani children, we are also thinking of non-Romani children in the same classroom. We have to come over the biases developed by the parents of those non-Romani children. I think this is a general problem that Romani children and parents are facing in any school that they are sending their children. High variable linguistic profiles of Romani communities require flexible approaches. So you cannot impose one variety over another. There's a rich variety of Romani language. This all should be respected and taken into consideration in that approach. Flexibility facilitated by focusing on learning rather than teaching. So it is the learner in the center, not the teacher. And flexibility also facilitated by adopting the plurilingual approach. And to bring this, again, theoretical policy guidelines into life, our experts also propose a policy experimentation which will help the Council of Europe refine and amplify the policy guidelines on the basis of empirical evidence. And we want to document good practice, establish international networks for future development. So teachers with teachers, school principals with others in our different countries. And it will contribute to the operationalization of Council of Europe's plurilingual approach, because to be honest with you, this is something we have been promoting for a long time, but we also need to know how plurilingual approach, educational approach works in this very difficult context. If it works in this context well, then we believe that it can work in many other contexts. And it will inform our ongoing drafting of a new recommendation by the Committee of Ministers on plurilingual education's contribution to democracy. Of course, we are hoping that this approach and the policy experimentation will benefit the participating schools by familiarizing them, the schools, the teachers, and the pupils with our plurilingual approach, and promote educational and social cohesion in the given schools. It will certainly help build pupils' self-esteem. This is the most important. I heard from our experts that many students experience this exclusion in the classroom, and they don't want to present their identity. This is problematic, and we are hoping that this plurilingual approach will contribute to building their self-esteem and so presenting their own identity. And it will, at the end, hopefully benefit all learners, not just Romani pupils. And who will be involved? As I mentioned, our expert group definitely, and some of them are already in this meeting. Dr. David Little couldn't join us today. We have Dieter Halbachs, Jan Hero, Selena Sadilkova, Diana Sima, and Susanna Bodranova. And 3 or 4 Council of Europe member states. I would like to inform you that we got enough interest from our member states to pursue this policy experimentation. That is really encouraging. And we want, there will be a national contact person and 2 to 4 primary schools in each country. And in each school, we would like to have the principal and the participating teachers, not just teachers who are supposed to teach Romani, but all teachers, if possible, involved, and also stakeholder representatives like Roma groups in a certain country or in a certain city. Of course, for doing this, we have resources. You already know curriculum framework for Romani. We have 2 language portfolios, and we have also Dieter probably already presented the very rich quality raw materials developed by University of Graz. And also there is the European Center for Modern Languages, quality raw training and consultancy, where Helena and Dr. Lidl are involved together with Jan. So this is what we had in the last year and what partially we are planning to do in the coming year. And I'm happy to share the policy guidelines with you, and then you can contact us for further information. And if you want to be involved in the webinars and other activities, please do not hesitate to contact us. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kilic, for this brief and very informative presentation. This really seems like a very important tool, so thank you very much. Next, we will have Ms. Zenfira Kondur, Project Officer and the coordinator of the project Protecting National Minorities, including Roma and Minority Languages in Ukraine of the Council of Europe, and the Roma activist very well known in Ukraine internationally. Ms. Zola Kondur, we are very happy to have you here as well. And Ms. Kondur will be making a presentation on the codification of Romani language in Ukraine. Zola, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anna. Dear colleagues, distinguished participants of the conference, it's a great pleasure to celebrate our Romani Language Day together. Roma are recognized as a national minority in Ukraine, and the Ukrainian constitution recognizes the rights of minorities to education and their native languages. Ethnic Roma groups speak different dialects, which to a greater or less extent have fallen under the influence of the surrounding languages. Dialects diversity within Romani in Ukraine is not fundamentally different from dialect diversity within any European country. Among most common such dialects are Sirvitki, Caldera, Slovari, Vlach, and maybe Rusko-Roma. According to online survey that was conducted by our project, most of the Romani speakers are bilingual. The Romani language is mainly used within the extended family and close community. And for example, 58% stated the fact that there is no possibility to learn Romani language in their places of residence. The survey results demonstrate the desire of Roma community in Ukraine to use the native language and pass it on to children, which will be enabled to preservation and development of the Romani language and further national self-identification of Roma. Currently, the Romani language in Ukraine is not codified and not taught in schools as a subject. There are no Romani language teachers in Ukraine, but at the same time, there are Roma who are initiating Romani language classes, or some Roma representatives of different dialect groups who are on their own initiative develop educational materials, texts, dictionaries, or even create cartoons in Romani language. It is worth to recall that Ukraine has taken a number of steps to amend its legislation in line with international standards and has publicly stated its readiness to meet the educational needs of Roma and other national minorities in their mother tongue. Based on the Ministry of Education request, the Council of Europe project that I'm representing today assisted the Institute of Pedagogy of the Academy of Science of Ukraine to establish the working group on codification of Romani language. I want to say that this institute is the only state institution which has national minority division, national minority languages division, and Romani language as part of it. The working group consists of the scientists and representatives of the Roma from different dialect groups. From the very beginning, the working group members faced several challenges, and the first was to design a writing system for the language. The second is to identify the dialect or variety of dialects. And the next one is alphabetic. Is it Cyrillic or Latin alphabet? So to address all these challenges, we have conducted several meetings with the Ministry of Education of Ukraine to discuss the planned work and our next activities with the Roma representatives of different dialect groups and with the scientists. So the work we plan will be consist of two components. First will be linguistic component, which we have the working group, as I said already, and the second component is a national advocacy on recognition of the Romani language. And we are very happy to partner in this work, actually very important work, with ERIAC and ERIAC experts. and we're really looking forward for the great achievements. Well, we understand that codification of the Romani language is a long-term process, and until this year, we decided to work on the vocabulary, like lexical minimum up to 700 words for the primary school. And then based on this, we will be able to see the dialects or dialects to work in the future with them. And of course, in 2021, we will start working on the curriculum and the text materials. But it's also very important, as I said before, to have trainings for future teachers of Romani language. But this is only a few steps that I mentioned we are going to take. The work will be very intensive for the next few years. Thank you very much.
Sola, thank you very much for the presenting of this very important work that you're doing in Ukraine. And last but not least, we have Mihaela Țatreanu, a Romani language teacher and language education expert with many, many years of experience, both in Romania and internationally. Also a distinguished member of the ERIAC Barba Lipe Academy member, and also the coordinator of the Romani Language Initiative currently at ERIAC. Mihaela will be presenting her speech on the transnational harmonization of Romani language, supporting the relearning of Romani by Roma individuals. Mihaela, the floor is yours. Please unmute yourself because we cannot hear you.
Ana, tavem bahtale romale tai romniale pralale hai peniale kai strunenameno pre o Facebook tavel bahtalo amare cibeaco dives amasite davduma anglicanes palmiri presentația kai credem actives. I'm going to present in English. I try to make a general view at the European level about our Romani language, and having more than 3.5 million speakers in Europe and approximately 500,000 in the rest of the world makes Romani one of the larger minority language in the area represented by the Council of Europe and in the European Union. In the past 2 decades, the use of Romani has shifted in frequent use in written, in public, and in remote relay communication, supported by new technologies and especially by social media, but also supported by institutions that provided infrastructure, expertise, and funding for the creation of printed materials and other media elements. The emergence of new Roma political, cultural, and religious networks and the rise of the electronic communication have all contributed to the massive expansion of Romani into new domains. Today, the massive migration of Roma in the past years offers us different pictures of the language use and dialectal spread at European and international level. Large groups of speakers are found not only in Southeastern Europe, but also in Central and Western countries. Romani language can be characterized as a non-territorial in its outreach, transnational in its strategic approach, and pluralistic in its practical implementation. Yet, despite the absence of centralization and territorialization, the promotion of Romani is a key element to the consolidation and politicization of Romani identity. Romani language and the historical origins are not only stable indicators of the Romani identity, but also a key element for the educational inclusion of Roma children, even more important for the Roma children in migrating situation. Currently, the states follow the lead of European policy bodies by adopting similar statements of aims, but they are slow in delivering action in their support, and it is mostly given to research rather than to practical work in education, for example. European bodies play a key role in the implementation strategies too, by delivering a model of curriculum framework and by providing grants to produce teaching and learning materials and to train teachers. But the Romani experience provides a rather unique example of an emerging language planning and language policy process which needs a transnational approach. If we look up in the history of other languages, they started as a product of intellectuals and only became a widespread ideology and a national property once they entered in the educational sphere facilitated by the states. In the case of Romani, in the absence of a territory, the efforts to instigate widespread change and transnational development of the language use and harmonization must rely on a persuasive power of a language council of Roma language experts and the European Institute such as ERIAC to encourage and legitimize the transnational development and the organization that is not centered around territorial boundaries or political sovereignty. Building up on the several national initiatives developed by Romani linguists and international experiences, it is time to unify efforts toward the transnational harmonization of Romani and promote its standards using the new technologies and the massive expansion of Romani into new domains. Harmonizing Romani at European level will involve, beside a long-term planning and cooperation process, developing competitive teaching resources and teacher trainings, it requires the development of our transnational Romani identity, raising awareness about the common identity elements based on common history. And an example is the core of our Romani language that has Indo-Greek origins, an element which is shared by all present dialects of Romani and points to a common phase in the early history of the Roma before their dispersion across Europe. And I would like to end by quoting the statements of two Roma political figures that attributed importance to Romani language, the former member of the European Parliament, Juan de Dios Ramirez Heredia from Spain, who said, "One of our most important, most significant signs is our Romani language, which serves as a connecting element and as a link between the Roma communities from around the world." And another one is Jan Hancock from the United States, who said, "The need to unite our diasporic people has never been greater, and the single most powerful tool we have in order to achieve that is our language." Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mihaela, for this very inspiring speech and an overview of what should be done. I would like to now invite Mr. Kilic back to turn on his camera. We still have 5 minutes for a question, and I'd like to ask all of you to maybe contribute. I was wondering, listening to your conversations, it seems like there is a lot of very rich expert experience, and there is decades of expertise developed not only by Roma and non-Roma linguists, scholars, but also by Roma individuals trying to engage in different initiatives. And we have these very important guidelines and policy documents, but it seems that the kind of step towards real Roma language education that's tangible has not produced yet. So I wonder, what do you think are institutional or structural changes that should happen both at the national level, but also internationally, so that we can really make sure that the preservation and language education of Romanes can really happen? Maybe Mr. Kilic could start, and then Zola and Mihaela, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I would say personally that it will start to kind of changing the mind shift of opening the language education policies to and making them plurilingualistic, which means that we see tendencies in many European countries that when you enter into the schoolyard, you are not allowed to speak any other language other than the languages of instruction. This is in a sense worrying, because then you are kind of blocking the children or students to live their identity. I mean, in the schoolyard, okay, in the classroom, it is understandable. While on the other hand, on the one hand, the governments or education authorities should try to ensure that each learner has quality instruction on the language of schooling. They have access like second language learning if necessary, but also they need to make sure that all the languages in the classroom are valued. I think that is the key to allow kids to build their self-esteem and live their identity. And and it also helps, plurilingual education helps building cognitive skills, and it can lead to academic achievement. And also it can help to social cohesion, because you expect that the other non-Romani children in the classroom can have a kind of sympathy or a curiosity to learn even a few words in any of the Romani dialects, which will help the students in the same classroom in the school to build trusted relationships, and they learn from each other, and it will help to Romani children to learn the languages of instruction while being valued. On the other hand, it will also help other non-Romani students to learn a few words in any other language. This is really interesting for children. For the states, for the public authorities, it is important to provide those opportunities, not to block them, but let people speak and live their identity as much as possible.
Thank you very much. Ms. Sola Kundur, Sola, would you like to respond? And Mihaela?
Yes, thank you. Well, in Ukraine, I think what is needed first is to codify the language. We will have to work very hard to, of course, to have written writing standardization of the Romani language. Then the other important step at the national and state level is to have maybe some affirmative actions for the universities or pedagogic colleges to have to prepare future Roma teachers of Romani language, including, and of course to have special programs to include and we have to develop the curriculum, of course, the text materials, the textbooks, and etc. Because without that, we will not be able to teach the Romani language in schools. But I see questions here regarding the alphabet, why people, why this problem appeared in Ukraine. The problem is that when we had the survey among Roma representatives, those who are living closer to countries like, for example, Hungary or Romania, they say that for the future communication of their children and better communication with the Roma living in different countries, for them, of course, it's better than to have Latinic alphabet. But then the elderly Roma people who cannot read Latinic alphabet, they were very much afraid and against Latinic, and that they would prefer to have codification in Cyrillic. So this is the problem in Ukraine. So we have also to have this common decision among Roma people in Ukraine. So in general, to conclude, of course, we need not only standardization of the Romani language in Ukraine, but we also need very practical steps at the state level on how they will implement it at the level of schools and universities. Thank you.
Thank you, Sola. Mihaela, would you like to have a final word before we close for a break?
Absolutely, yes. Thank you very much for this. I think we need a very serious update of the international instruments and the national legislation regarding the status of Romani language and transform it according to the actual picture of the Romani society, of the Roma migration, of the fact that Roma, I take the example of Germany, you don't have only Sinti or national Roma, but you also have a lot of migrant Roma that also have the right to education. How about their status as migrant children that have the right to quality education? I think we should concentrate then, after updating legislation to the realistic situation of Roma. We need teaching materials based on the actual modern teaching strategies that offer actualized content inspired from the everyday life of the target group. We need attractive methods of teaching and materials designed following the action-oriented approaches. We also need to bring back the motivation of relearning the language and give Roma a realistic image of their language use, that, which is also used in many other different countries, and the differences between the dialects, but also explain to them the importance of the mother tongue language for their personal development, for their personal identity, dignity, self-esteem, and self-confidence.
Thank you, Mihaela, brilliant. I would like to thank very much all of the panelists in this panel for your very important speeches and your very insightful presentations. And I would like to now invite all of you following us here live on Facebook, and also those of you who are here with us on the webinar, for a short break. We will be coming back at 4:45. So please don't disconnect, just stay online, and please come back here 4:45 sharp for the remaining panels of this conference, and see you soon. Thanks. We are back in 10 minutes, so join us at 3:45 Central Eastern European Time.
Avem bahtale, pralale hai peniale, sam parpale tumenza, live. Mangaftea Carav Mire Drago Manushen, kai sian de Miro Panelo, I Raini Silvia Lakatos, andari Hungaria, Catara Universiteto Peci, Miro Profesoro o Gheorghe Sarău, andari România, Catara Universiteto București, o Cristian Pădure, kai si lectoro co Universiteto București, hai I Erica Godlova, Miri Pen, kai si librarian, ande Statoski, Lilengo Ker, andari Oprešov, andi Slovakia. Mišto avilen parpale, orai o Gheorghe Sarău nidi kavles, Šaite keres konekcija menca, nai saraftu ke gata di
Man, sunan.
Nai stumenge ka era kleni vrema, te avena dives amenza, tai nai saraftu menge but, andar tumari barbali kontribuția ka andin andekadea buki sastebersha vashi romani chib. Tai mangavte astarav mai anglal, mire peneasa, I Silvia Lakatos Cataro Peci Universiteto, de penela menge sarsi I situația e romani cibiachi, ande educația, ande Ungaria. Rugi saraftu Silvia, nabi stren savorete alosaren o canalo kai sie cib e rusicani, anglalte den duma, soske amare penia keren translația ande anglicani cib, Toven sigurno kai sen ande rusicani cib rugi saraftumen.
Akana sunesma?
Akana sunaftu.
Danes kai baktale lakato Silviasi under ungrikotem sarpenda mesitjarav eshib amari shib ande universiteta ababishtai duibes kerabuti pe Pécsujeszko Universiteto, tai nanuma romane savoren, vagy ternen, vi gázsen szitjárav pe amari shib. Nei saraftu menge o akaripe, hogy sajvorbi szara vagy ez pecado sukágyes pe amari dakishib, zurales putyadisim, hogy anda ungrikotem, mert tai vi deklen vi melinda sajvorbi szara. Numa jek dui gindura janaftu menge te penav ke cerasi amari vrama, numa jek dui informácia penavtu menge, de anglonesko dosio mai fontoso, hogy katár jek miatt tai inyeseletei tritobes, ando ungrikotem siamen jek hakai, savi avri pene, hogy kanad okto, dad vagy dej, mange kataro serunokon ande škola kerabuti, atunci muszáj te szitjaren e romani shib. No, kado akana ande ungrikotem kadesi, hogy ande palunobes sosas, kedejek statisztika, edukácia ki oficia, te palakodozának tumengete penav, hogy ande hurdelin, vagy ande ungrika ovoda, kaj cinephiren, zolares cinephiren, kote akana siame jek selatai bista jek savoro, ande teluni škola siame akana eftasela žene, tai ando gimnáziumo vagy más kerutni škola siame oktova desta sov savora kon sition oficionales e romani shib, tai vi ande opruni škola, tai ande universiteto sitjaras ando ungrikotem amari shib. No, me kodok indi szaraf, hogy kado naibut ke kana me kedemuri dissertácia ando 2010 atunci duvar katijene sitile ando ungrikotem oficionales amari shib, kado kana jekcera palpale ustilam, kado najlásom me kodok indi szaraf. De trubujte penavtu menge vikodo, hogy oficionálne sajkeras ando ungrikotem exameno under amari shib, si kodo kana pala gimnáziumo sajkeren o exameno, kado aba kata 2005 vikate jek butja ki grupa siame, mesime šerutni, da kadi butja ba dešu 5 beš keras ketane, da keren o exameno under amari shib, pasha diploma vai kana mai duramente sition leterne ande universiteto. Tai numa iek katsevotan siame kana ando ungrikotem, kai officionale shaikeren exameno anda amari shib, no kodonai laso ke me kodogindi sarav ande monopol situația sikadotan, trebuias mai buttavem. No, te trebuite penaftu menge hogy amaro governmento kadegindi sarel hogy avriskiri sarel diferentna aplikációi kaj saj kerem vi NGOs, amare romane organizációk saj kerem aplikácia, vagy saj kerem vi univerziteta aplikácia, taj saj keras atunci kana Lászlóve pe amari shib konferencia, ando avindi pe avlame me kadegindi ande kadosol maskar, ande kadeshonesko maskar, jak bari romani shibaki konferencia, saj keras shibake tábora lesaborenge, vagy saj keras kacavela ginagya pustika, so von potinena menge, taj majbut žanas kacavela materia tekeras. Nanuma kacavela butja žutisarela mego tem, ke vi pasha universiteta me saj keraviek shibako butjako grupo, kaj akademko dole manusen kon ando ungriko tem sitjaren amari shib, simas kalende vigaje virom, tej kama viko dele manusen katene te kidavle, te pushavle, hogy szászi amari shibako rodipe, ke ande ungriko tem mai buđene kerem buti sociolingvistika sa shibasa kerem buti, taj me kodogindi sarav, hogy len trubujte akarasan de kadi buti, hogy te žanas, hogy szážal anglala mari buti amari shibaki. No dui ke žana, hogy žartare vrama, dui buti kamate penav. Naj dosta mare pustiki ginagi, najeme dosta materule rura, či žana varite penav. Ova, taj trubuje sinke amen, kad se vela sikarate aven, con ando universiteto lempengi diploma, tai officionale shai sitjaren shib, ke ande ungrikotem inke najkacavi. Per homologia ande universiteto, siame homologia, kote aven avri kacavila kan si diploma, de naj shibake sitjara. Tehát kodo trebuie sinke tekeras. But trebuie sinke tekeras ketane pekadi buti ke si so tekeras. Me kodo gindi sarav, hogy vi ando ungrikotem kadi buti majzurali avla, ke ande dulmutani brama kade gindi sarav, hogy egyszerre Párizsa kadi buti, hogy ketane te hutilas, hogy csácses ande žani peski buti, tekeras buti, kadi angluni sia menge, akana, hogy te žas mai anglal, te rodavko dole manusen, kasa žana ketane te kera buti, ande amaro tem, ander amari romani shib. Nej szeraftu menge, hogy jas hundema, cera brama si buđana pekadi téma te vorbi szerafke ande muro ilo avel, de žena, hogy nanuma mesim agyeskon saj vorbi szárel. Nej szeraftu menge.
Ikav kado vimenai saraftuke, tai sembahtali, kai situmen kasavi bari experienza, tai but shukar iniciative kai astarden ando ungriko, akai asiek demonstrația mare cibeaki kai tu san andaro ungriko mesem andari Rumunia, ai shai hachara samen but miștoiek havrean, tai amari cib si ketani, amari cib trebal bare ardi mai dur. Akana semloșali kai avdives si pașmande miro mai baro profesoro. Andari România, o Gheorghe Sarău, kai kerdas o mai baro, ai mai vașno sistemo e cibeaco andi România co naționalno nivelo, si te de la mengeduma pal vare să avea importanto aspecturea, kai kerdas len andi România e instituțiența, te șai aresel, che codo nivelo, kai i romani cipsi si cavdi ande România, Raya sarau rugi saraf tu putar tiro microfono, tai alosar irusicanicib. Putar tiro microfono. Nishun aptuto microfono si panglo. If you can please open the mic of George.
Akana shunen man la.
Akana shunastut.
Shunen man diken ban la chodives la chi riat pereli riat akana bud shukar sar vakerdia samari Silvia lakatos bud shukar sas bud shukar viso tu penes visar tu penes Mihaele vi savore mire sa studentoria sas vi Diana Sima vi Norica vi o Cristian vari pativ catarmande tradav celav savorenge kai sembullo shalos o kai a canapa la trianda triva desberșa cataroberș canasas linii decizia co mașcartemutno nivelo de avel iecetani romani grafia Cana coștarto congresso andari Varșava, daroberșe nia vardește. Sas le mai anglutne inițiative e direcție, sas si cavdei direcție romanice viache, dih acana inclislevi aver neve manușa să ave dihav tu cempen savos eu mai la ciodrom e romane chetan neci viaco. Hai sarpenias amari Mihaela va Româniate ame kerdeam vare să ave butiaco dolesc ame sama savriama cașuche ci mangleante șunas so si diferența mașcare dialectoria ame dihleam savriama co e chetanodrome ci diaco ame dihleam hi romani chetanici kai nai la vai site cosa se differenze te anasi ci te kidasi ci che taneste te avel mai zorarli dihen vitume kanasiek tigno rukhoro tigno ta canana cines e triangelesche atunci vova cel tigno cana cines lenge triange atunci vov Uciarelpes, giallo pre, da? E cadia si vici, că a me di caz numai po orizontalo level. Atunci ci che rascanci, di casa numai dialectoria. E dialectoria si bud la ce. Mi me di le manghe o doctorato andar diec dialecto. Andaro fora hano, andaro hanota riengo dialecto. Tanare ser numai dialecto. So a me gianas Feral, si bud, la cibuti numai sosite putrasa Maria ca, dedicas po horizontalo sarva canenecco la vermanusha, aite kidas te lias sasi ketano. Sasi araclo catarie foneticane primo sarimane. Te lias codola forme save nanaias vanile. Teliasco dola forme catariela va, catare dume, savesi le mai ciaciudne, savesas te penoclenge nanai harniarde, savesi saste, entrego, sarpes. Dichen, so ame kerdeam, amari bacht sas, codolesque sardichen vicate, vitumende, ande esas comunisticane trema, siamen cadeva, so sia men manusha, sia men godiaver manusha, inorica kerdias, i grekiganici, i latinicanici, andi mașcarutni școala. Sas iec bud la ci școala, dihen atunci inclisle, bud, godiaver, bud, manusha să vesiclile lil. Atunci, cana saso puta ripene lumia, quando verse mie enia și la enia vardeș, e roman dari România putarde penge acra caringi hungaricani o hungaricani sicleri pen modelo caringe slovacani najano mai but aver minoriteturia, hai kerde kopia. Haite che razviame. Hai le mai angludne le akcije sasas teliasi ketani romanigrafia. Duito buti sas, sarsi Mihaela Cate, te angle keras preparația leternengi le siglovnengi romane siglovnengi save avile andare gavate te avenande foruria che pedagogica le școle taite ciclion ande panch versate resen cicliarne vace chavore na sase sartepenas dostutno modelo. Atunci me cherdeam averbuti. Haite că razmi la este școli. Gianen buciucar să îi România a resliki ștarvardeș aiecto romani mila este școla kada va milai. Palazzo vova gordine ca să avem mila este școle a me accardiam lente aven ando octobro ando svacoberș te ciclion dural te avem chi facultetat, hai te beșenchere, te kerem buti sar romani cicliarne, te kerem buti le ceavorența picib, andari romanici, hai te avem e gvar pocion, sar studenture dural, long distance. Hai te ciclion te liem penge universitari. Tai oduito drom sas, te putras ki amari universiteta, na kana sar pendea so raio muro amal la choa o velko kaitazi so andaro bel 2000 de șupanci putardevi von o ciclo vipen romanici biaco șuca numai so ame putardean sar pendea si Mihaela andaro bel și nia vardeș ai duito i Cehia i Milena Creșanova putardea sandoveș egmia inia și la inia proiecto veș o Hristo Piuciuco, vivo, cherdeas varisave berșar, trin ștar, panci berșar, măgeano sode, e ca să vo ciclo vipen, o universitaro nivelo, andi universiteta andaro veliko Trnovo. Ta me andaro beše nja vardeša duto si bari experiența barocchi vipen, codoleske avile budman șasa visiclile, Lile penge universitaro diplome, tal sartume di resle nanuman de școle, chiar de penge doctoraturi, andari romanici, tai cadea mai dur. Mai sasa men aver ca să ave experiențe pirimata. Codolesche sia men e baro gin, e școludneli lengo, ai barogin e universitaroneli lengo. Ame samas zoriarde, te keras curriculumuri, vaci romanici, vaci istoriale romene, vaci tradiție. Te keras in matematica andi romanici. Sia meno sa sto sa sto completo, vaci le mai angludneștar clase, pi matematica, nai. Avrei hanende e ca să vibuti. Dihen so star. I Mihaela canavili voi pașalman de ando Ministerul Educația că pendem la că haite ne viaras e școludne curriculumoria piromanici hai palal amari experiența sas de mica tare Evropaco Consilo hai vicote si cada experiența tu me va chiar din eso acana palem roden tu me te avem neve programe, neve curriculumoria co Europudno nivelo. Si la cibuti. Numai so, si vide che ras mascaramende paruvimata, te diha sotume dicle, sotume keren andi Ungria, sotume keren andi Ucraina, sosterna pucenamen, i Moldavia, sosterna pucenamen, codolesca me sam perudne, sam cade vicinuria. Beșas, avreste, aștite ajuti saras, amen budlo cresc, tai nu mai sosi che tano, te avas con Europul non nivelo, te si cavas, dihen, ame, catre, ando cadava regiono, cherdeam cadea, gial, Aștite te la charas janglimata le chavorenge dihem terniale si te inkerengo di sonet henar tunenge nais e romaneda iange de iange so I romani civna hasagduri nais vile si clernenge le ternenge savea vile ande pedagogicanesco ande facultate
Ai vimena isaraf tuke but kai bariardian mai la ce experturia andar eromane manusha kai sia kanak ande sti Europa mai butar landarlende si andari România tai cadala siker de tutar tai na isaraf tuke andar savore ileste andar sasti contribuția kai sastut tai e ideea pala mari inițiativa site kerasi mai zorali conexia mașcare universiteturea, kai kerem buchi pali romani cip, tai te parvasca să ave experiențe, te șai te aresas, că amari ketani cip, ande sa sti lumea, soske amari cip si ketani, tai amaro, ki dipe avdives, kai haceara sa mensako e kavres, esi ek demonstrația palcodo. Ta că n-am gavte akarav mire prales, o cristian pădure, kai si andari România, tai
Vivo si miro
producto cataro o amaro profesoro Gheorghe Sarău, vivov ker das studie vi ande Franța, Cristian rugi saraftut penamenge so mange sardikestu i situație romane cibiachi. Ande cado momento savi prezentația situt active sandaramente.
Avem să ste bahtale savore, mai angle savorend arcamafte na isaraf tumenge savore manushenge cataro ERIAC pala tumari inițiativa ca si bud mișto avili amegianaske nai bud organizație andi lumea kai dem pengo intereso cadea buhles ar kerentume pala romani cib hai pala romani cultura hai janaske i cib si ekvaz no kotor katar romani cultura na isaraf tumenge hai savore tumare parteneronge savore manusha kai keren buti tumența catar o consilio la Evropaco hai aver parteneruria kai si tumen catar aver universitate ceaces vimesem e candare e producto cataro rai Gheorghe Sarău hai budna isarav vileske pala sosemei adives si vaš leski buti kai vov dicleas que si potențialo hai na semnumame si but aver sarmande mansi mai bach te avav tumența ages la sarmande si but aver roma kai sas todine angle janas que o romen nazleno shayud nimosi posibiliteta na jana sostar pushaf ma via kana te aven angle hai te den duma von andapende hai von palapende akana na isaraf tumenge que si ameni ocazia o shayud nimos te kerasca de abuti budiam duma ages pala romani cib Pateau că n-ai andu pușipe cana i romani cib si ketani cib hai cana haliarasamen hatiarasamen savore e cavresa na hasaraso vahte te anas argumentația pala cadea buci con camerte dichel si les iacte dichel hai cana te așunel n-ai amengo so starte keras demonstrația me na sam doșale, janes si prezumția codoia ca penel pe că o manuș n-ai doșalo, musa ia verte si ca vede schidoș. N-ai amenge sos tate si ca vască amare cipsi ketani, hai haliarasamen, hatiarasamen mașcaramente. Aver subiecto palo savod deaspe duma but adives hai baro drago simage că așundem să mai ocazia pe așuna să cada la discuție but interesanto si pala e politike hai e politike e cibiache hai pala e școlutneli la hai pala o materialo hai pala e curicula Čačeske si bud vazno te buhľarazlen, te lašarazlen, haj te das dumo, fie savo sar dašti saras, ando tan, kaj bešas, kaj keras buti, haj vite keras echipe, te keras buti ke tanes e cabresa. Da mai si ec aspecto, savo na trebal te bistrasles, si ke sal roman, sar chave ander școle, astaren si cotor cadara proiectea. Gianas că si cadaia carta e cibianghe e catari Europa, si ec legislația evroputni zuralica e ceacearel e romani și tacadea. Me penaftu menge sem vi profesoro ande e tigni școla catari e gav romano cate ande grid bisterdo lumiatar. Hai penaftu menge că ande școle si bud pares adies andi România penaftu menge te mai arache sectan sa profesoro pala romani cib andar che i discriminația hai o anti-țiganismo, o gipsismo arachel pes vi kai cadava nivelo musai te das amenzor te buhlearas vie conștiința mașcar amare roma kai te mangen penge hakaia penge drepturia sarpenas sos tarpenaf cadaya e legislația penel că o te kai îl da mangen i romani ciban di școla si musai te kere pe romani ciban di școla e numai că n-ai but kai mangen na că na cei lolen i romani cib si numai pala o intereso pala educația amegea nas că mașcar amende amesam i populația e manușa mai țira educhimei, ca se amen mai po hanță educația andar Europa. Hai si normalo te n-am mangas i romani cib ki școla, andar că ni mangas ni matematica, ni mangas ni fizica. Pala mande si pen.
Concluzia do sarafto sos că mai si samo 5 minuti ai mangavi Erica te
pena. Ok. I concluzia si că kana keras buti pala legislația, hai pala o materialo, pala ilila, musai te keras buti vi amare romența kai te janen ke si kada la legislație, hai si kada la materialo. Na isaraftu menge savorenge.
Dimena isaraftu că taves bahtalo, a kana miripene Erica andari Slovakia aver demonstrația si te kerel, kai amari chip hacerel pe zbut mișto. Erica pena menge sosinevo tute ande Slovakia.
Nice tuke palikerav tuke Mihaela, palikerav savorenge tumenge andalo ERIAC tai andalo aver organizáciu save kergian kada kedipen a dinyan amenge temange kada shaipen te vakerav tumensate dikhavman tumensate te penav palmiri experiența palmiri buti pal amari buti samen keras. Me paťavka šaj haľuvas, amen, chaťaraz amen, jek avres, thete akana, vakrava miro dialekto pale Slovakia, vesom Rumungri, andalo Prešov, a miri tema da dives hini, te vakerav pale Butisavi keras andro dokumentačno te informačno centrum, aj centro, vaše romani kultúra. Kodo centro hiniek kotor andre temeskri janibnaskri vai temeskro janibnaskro lilengrok her state academic or state research library tepenav English amen sam jek projekto savo peskerdia zandro berž duj ezerate dešujek amen samas o nacionálno projekto savo peľas Andre grupa maškaro projekta pala digitalizácia. Avka slamen keras hin odahoj keras digitalizácia vai to vas romani kultúra gigi romani kultúra a nazla Andre digitálno luma. Keras digitalizácia Andro trin nekbare der vai majbare sféry. Je to hini orálno história, ovakeribenale manušenca, palo dui nekbare der temi. Jek to tema, hini hoi vakeras lenca palo politika net, sociálna parvipena, averipena, nevipena, savepen acile, palo berš sarandate panč, starvardeštaj panč, anglo bišto, andro bišto šelbershipen. Dahin enevi situácia sa visas palo duito lumakromari ben. Naneamen but manušandre Slovakia save leperen, save šaj leperen produito lumakromari ben. Soskel manuša romane manušandre Slovakia na živen but. Naneamen but pure manuša. Vaša dakadi tema. Duito tema pale Andre Amari orálno história hini oparu vypena palo Eňa Vardeš te Ochtovardeš te Eňa to berš. Ale kovli revolúcia sa penázamen Andre Slovakia vai Andre Porani Čekoslovakia. Kada hin orálno história odojamenge peľas te literatúra, vakeras arakas rodas lemanušen, save hine autora, save hine aktívna Andre literárno sféra. Dujto sféra amari, vaj dujto kotora mari buti hini normálno romasam bašaviben. Obašavibene muzika hiniek nekbare der kotor Andre Romani kultúra. Kada hin oduito kotor a otrito kotor hin Romane vastenge buťa, Romani crafts. Vastenge buťa sa hine tradicionálna, no vi moderna, bud moderna. Hinamen vio vastenge buťa sa vešaj nás hine digitálna. Hine kerde elektronicko dromeha. Hine kerde numa virtuálno. A vi odola hine, vi o vastenge buťa, vi o artikane buťa. Savoroko do hin amari téma. Vaša dahoj amen sam Andre kadi grupa maškare digitalizačna projekta, aka najmar nasam o projektu, aka nasam o normalno regulérno tán, kajkeren Eňa manuša, trinžene olendar sam Roma, hinamen akana amaro portálo, amaro prezentačno portálo skaj šaj diken savoroso kergiam. Savoroso kergiam hine o videa, o audio recordings, hine o fotografii, o skeny, te jek špeciálno kategória sa vyhinamen, odala hine o virtuálna dikhibena. Dain vareso so kana o manuš šaj te džal, šaj penas Andre škola, kaj hine perdo piktura, čitre penazamen, kataro romane čavore, save hine bud prinžarde Andre lumasoske, avrik helde bud moli pena Andro bud tema, pena akana vakera vpale jek cikni škola, save hine Andro jarovnice, kodo si jo jek bud prinžardo gav Andre Slovakia, nek baredere romani komunita, buteršcar, panč ezera, panč mi, Roma, bešenodoj. A šaj čas pre digitálnu túra, tedy kes savoro so odojhin, savore piktura, savore buťa save odola čavore kerde. A mari buťihin, tete keras nača o video, nača vare savi dokumentácia, no keras te vare sa so pezvičinel metadata. Metadata hine o deskripčná data, deskripcii, palo savore objekta, save amen kergiam. Sakojek video, sakojek audio, paš koda kotor, savo amen vičinas, vaj digitálno kultúrno objektos, vaj odahin avkapendo e-born, pašo sakojek kotor, šaj araken, pergi verifikovano informácia, kokergia, skana, kohino o autoro.
Erika, naisaraf tu kebut, akavasiamenge claro soske kotesiek but barvali resursa vaš i romani kultura, kaj šaj te parovas maškaramende ke Evropa ko nivelo, kaj akavasi inkejek data si kavelamenge, kaj si but iniciative pali romani čipte, pali romani kultura, kaj šaj te taslen ketanes. Aj Janavka i najamen vreama, normalno sastia vela mena kana ek diskusija maškaramende, te šaj te krasjek tigno debato, ama pakiavka i nakliam minuturi ai trebalte agori saraskate, na i saraftu menge but savorenge, tai pakiavka i si te avela men șansa te keras colaborația mai dur, te tasi ke taneste savore experiențe, kai si kerdeva și romani chip, tai va și romani cultura de verver tema, tai pe cadala te bariaras mai dur, amari strategia pal o romano pali romani chip ke Europa con nivello. Ai me pachiav kai vitume sarvime pachiav kai vitume pachian sarvimande, kai i romani chip shai te keras palate, e harmonizația ke Europa con nivello. Na i saraftu menge but kai scena sav diversamența, kai dav mai dur i conexia ke acau aver panelo kai buciol transnational ca na trebalte jav pe anglicani chip te dav duma anglicanes, na i saraftu menge savorenge inke igdav. I'm back to English. Now we move to the next panel, which is called Transnational Development of Romani Language and Culture, which will be moderated by my colleague Ionida Costache. Please, Ionida, and welcome to the other participants.
Thank you, Mihaela. Like Mihaela said, this panel will be in English for the first part, and then our last presentation will be in Romani, and I will ask everyone to switch their interpretation when that time comes. So the penultimate panel of today's conference will be on transnational development of the Romani language and culture. So I'd like to jump right in with our first panelist, who is Diana Kirilova. Diana, can you turn your video and microphone on, please?
Yes.
Hello, Diana.
Hello.
Diana is a graduate in Romani Studies from the Analco Institute in Paris and holds a PhD in Education Sciences. Diana is also an ERIAC consultant for the ongoing Romani language book project. She will speak to us about the role of Roma women in the transmission of language. So please take it away, Diana.
La chogives savorenge, ashunen man? Ashunen? Ashunen? Can you hear me? La chogives savorenge, mesemni Diana Kirilova, Romni Katari Bulgaria, Katari Grupa Eromengi Savesi o Kalegiora. Avgives kadavdoma pali Romani Jubli, Taisar I Romani Jubli del I chip and I Romani familia. I Romani Jubli si I Jubli kei putarel o Romano ker, kei inkerel I Romani familia, te kei beshel mai budvakti ando ker. Voisio manush kei bianele chaven, kei bariarele chaven, te kei sikavele chaven e diaki chip. Voinakel o vakti mai but pe chavencer e familiasa te kere. Voisio mai važno te glavno faktori, kai šaite inkerer pes I Romani chip. Avgives I mangavte davduma palne save aspectora save si I cultura, I tradiția, o modernismo, te chiaravlen dedicavsar padem pezvon Romane cibiasa, ando contexto Romane cibiaco. Canadas duma pali cultura, so si e cultura, so aha chiarel pes canava chiaras pali cultura. I cultura si sariek manush uravel pes, savi duma del savi chip del duma o manush, sarin chiarel pes, sar uravel pes, tai sarva chiarel. Covasi o caracteristiche vașiec cultura, sar inchiardol o manush. I tradiția si Kana vakeras kataros si kado aspecto sosi tradiția si soles katar sosasa anglatute te sodes andoker andi familia sosi kaves soles te sodes kovasi tradiția si vari diferenția mașcaroi tradiția te tradiționalismo amesia men mașcaro Roma save si tradiționalna te save nai tradiționalna o Roma savesi tradiționalna vonin care ni chip te palon natural no drom den i chip pe peschere chave pe peschirunu cora te giajal catare generația per generația covasi i definiția palec tradiția o modernismo si sociomodernismo o modernismo si ovakti and saveste amen jivisaras avgive taisar jalovakti kana keres adaptația po modernismo te nikames te anescova sosasos anglatute tu aces moderno manuș te bisteres hasares i tradiția cova de kelpes mașcar o Roma savesi moderna Roma vai tradiționalna Roma avgives kana te vakerasando contexto and emigrația co contexto te i situația romensar te romane cibiasa so acel o Roma saveveshen ando puvia kai silengere diake kai sasa biandegote ando mahale si kai Roma ke nimangen mai te vakereni romane chip so sigindi saren ke lenge chave nashtika janki școala nashtika den domalace igajikani chip asi aver tradițional Roma să vedem peste dumai romani chip tai i romani chip ni hasavol del pes andoker in kerel pes tega ni bistardol o romani pe in kardol so si identiteta si i chip e chemanușesi saren kardol pes leski cultura lese practice lese tradiția che practice o culturalno identiteti kerel pes definiția catari chip cataro inchiari pe te cataro tradiție o Roma save inchiare în pumari chip inchiaren vi pumari identiteta colako hasaren chip hasaren vi peschiri identiteta mangavte davto menne save hipoteze pala o Roma save denduma te save nicamente denduma avgives i romani chip isi Roma che chieren școle bare școle facultete universitete te nimanger mai te den duma romane so se penen che ni diken benefito catari romani chip penen so se si mangi romani chip naștite dav andibuti conic ni mangelman daran catari discriminația te cataro chudimos canate ahalavem pesche si Roma ocola consi bariarde consi bien de romane cibiasa von ni hasaren la kaito ventoven bizo savi situația tovel vi canasi faculteta vi universiteta von inkaren i romani chip o romani pe o purane manusha avgives inkaren o purani pe canasi amene purano andamaroker sopenas inkaras o romani pe o purano inkarel pi chip inkarel pi tradiția inkarel pi cultura sosi o romani pe si che o rom shaite kerel adaptația pe saiec situația ande saviate beșel shaite traisarel ande save condiție teme kesles shaite la charel potraio tai mangaftu mendar tana bisteren tumen savesan sosan tinkeren romani chip te bariarenla te zurerenla so se avgivesiamen i romani chip che del pes duma co conferenție co evrputne niveli keras pustica pi romani chip te cova inkerela maro zurari pe amari identiteta te trubulte jas so mai opre toven sa steveste bachtale na saraftu menge kai akadema pe kavagives devlesa.
Thank you so much, Diana, for those really beautiful comments. I really appreciated your definition of culture as something that we all carry forward as identity, being a practice of carrying forward tradition. I really thought those were beautiful comments. Thank you. So next we'll hear from Kirill Koshanov, who is a postdoctoral researcher in Romani language at Södertörn University in Stockholm. Kirill is also a consultant on the ERIAC Romani language book project, and Kirill will speak on the corpus of Romani.
Thank you, Nida, for your kind presentation. Ten bachtale salve con nașunel de conferențe, zor să se mostu menga tomar manușenga adică dodies la România bac. Quite a few people today have commented on the ways science, and particularly linguistics and anthropology, can contribute to standardization of Romani language and transnational unification of one variety of Romani. Also, quite a few people mentioned different resources that can be developed in order to do so. And as a part of my presentation today, I would like to say a few words about a very specific tool that I think has not been used sufficiently enough in Romani studies in general, but can be very useful for creating and developing a common Romani language. This tool is a corpus of texts in the language. This tool has been an important tool both for research, both in linguistics and anthropology for many years. And it is different from a regular collection of texts. The difference is that corpus has an annotation. It can be a translation, it can be morphological information, it can be different types of annotations. But importantly, in this collection of texts, we can look for certain forms or words or synonyms using these annotations. Many languages, especially big languages in the world, English or Russian, have corpora, and obviously the number of words included in this corpora are quite large. For instance, some corpora of English have billions of words. The corpus of the Russian language has over 300 million words. When it comes to Romani, we still don't have large corpora. We don't have collection of texts in this language that are annotated. And here I would like to present a corpus of Romani, which was created in the 20s and the 30s in the Soviet Union as a literal language, as a standard language. It is available online. I will share my screen to show you a few things from there. So this is the corpus. You can find it on the internet. You can just Google it, and it allows a few possibilities for search in this corpus. It is probably arguably the largest corpus of Romani that we have at the moment in the world. It has almost 1 million tokens, a little bit less at the moment, but it will be updated soon. And you can look for different collocations for different words. There are different ways to look for it, and I will show you just one, which is the translation. So, for instance, here you can look for the word which means apple, right? So you just click, and the corpus brings you all contexts where this word is used. So you can see that we have 57 matches in 16 different documents for this word. If we look for the word, let's say forest, we get 600 matches in 83 documents. What's important is that we can find all sorts of contexts and also frequency of different word forms. When people try to create a common language, a standardized variety of Romani, it's very often become a question of discussion and debate. What word should be used? What collocation should be used? And if we consider the criterion of frequency a relevant one, then the corpus can be a very useful source for that. Also, you can look for synonyms. You can look for different constructions and expressions. In a nutshell, basically, a corpus can become a very important tool when discussing and developing a common language. And in general, if we look at this corpora and if we look at these different attempts at creating a standard language, as this one that was done in the 20s and the 30s in the Soviet Union, we can probably also learn something from these attempts and also learn from the mistakes that have been already made. For instance, I'll just mention a few things, not going into detail. For instance, it was a problematic issue when the people discussed the alphabet for standard Romani in the Soviet Union at the time. And as a result, they decided to use a Cyrillic version with certain variations from the standard Russian language. But still, it was a problem. And of course, there was no consistency in spelling and so on. So that's something that should be considered. Another thing is that the way it was done in the Soviet Union it was chosen, one variety of Romani, namely Russian Romani, was chosen as the basis of this standard language. And it happened to be proven that it was probably a mistake, because when teaching this variety in schools, also, for instance, for Calderas Roma, whose dialect is very different from Russian Romani, it became a problem, and the children simply could not understand this Common Romani that was taught at school. So, and it probably also brings us back to the question that was raised by Kimo, if we want to harmonize or we want to standardize a language. So probably using just one variety in order to create language is not an option, and probably it just becomes, it only gives us more problems and more difficulties on this way. But I think that corpora in general and creating of such tools can be very useful, can be just very useful on our way for our attempts to create a transnational variety of Romani. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kirill, for presenting that really interesting digital tool in kind of this transnational development of the Roma language. Thank you. So next we have Natalie Tomenko is our next speaker. She is the creative director at the Youth Agency for the Advocacy of Roma Culture from Ukraine, and will present on a Romani language app for youth.
Nice to meet you, Anita. Hello, everyone. I'm so grateful for the opportunity given to me being with you here today for such relevant day for our community. Let me introduce myself. I belong to Servo Roma community in Ukraine. Currently, I'm a student at the Central European University Cultural Heritage Studies program in Vienna. In parallel with that, I'm running a Roma youth NGO, ARCA, in Ukraine. Also, recently, I have started to cooperate with European Roma Rights Center, where I became a national volunteer coordinator in Ukraine dealing with digital anti-Gypsyism. Well, and today I would like to present for you a project established previous year. It's Romanes, the Romani speaking language learning mobile application. The initiative was created as a method to safeguard the Romani language. For example, in Ukraine, there is an issue that in most cases, Romani language was preserved by those closed Roma groups who use it only with each other, mostly between the older generations. And a lot of Roma youth do not speak their own language, unfortunately, but they have a great desire to preserve it. In the same time, not knowing the available ways how and where to study Romani. Due to the creation of the mobile application Romanes, a modern solution to the issue was invented. The idea to create an application Romanes was established with initiation of two Roma activists, Artur Ivanenko, who is the head of the Roma non-governmental organization Kherson City Association of Young Roma, and myself, who represent ARCA organization. We have got two donors who contributed to the project. That's the Romani Education Fund and International Renaissance Foundation in Ukraine. We have a team which consists of IT and design departments. Also, there is a linguistic department who is leading Nikolai Ilyin, a Romani language expert in Ukraine. When we were choosing the language, we decided to pick Russian for translation with their purpose, because we wanted to enlarge the number of users. And also when we were choosing the dialect, we were operating with data given by Council of Europe project, protection of national minorities, including Roma and minority language in Ukraine, where was found that the Serbo dialect is the most common in Ukraine. This is why it's dominated in our app. And now I will switch to structure of the application. There is a Cyrillic version of the app where Romani Servo dialect translates into Russian. And nowadays there are more than 600 users from Ukraine, Russia, Moldova, and Bulgaria. In the framework of the app, there were created 25 blocks with more than 600 basic words and phrases differentiated by topics. For example, introduction, house, food, animals, anatomy, and etc. Where users actually could read here the pronunciation of each word and translation in a form of stickers or interactive forms that is visually simple to grasp. Also, to some topics, there were created dialogues between two mascots, Kola and Alona, who are chatting in daily situations. And after 1 year from the publication, there was conducted research and evaluation of the results and was established a new need of Latin version of the app. Currently, our team is working on these new updates. They will be published in the beginning of next year. They will be adaptation for foreign users. So the application will be possible switch to Latin version with translation into English. And also we are working on design rebranding and extension of the vocabulary and dialogue section. In addition, to sum up, I want to say that recently we've got a proposition for cooperation from our colleagues from Spain, who would like to have in framework of our app Romanes, the branch with Spanish, Catalonian, Roma dialect. And now we are negotiating about it. What I want to show telling this that we are open to cooperation and willing to enlarge the number of dialects into Romanes application, what will allow to safeguard Romani language and transfer to next generation. Thank you for attention.
Thank you so much, Natalie. That's such a cool application, and there's already so much interest in the sort of further development of it. I think it's a really interesting kind of digital solution to a really widespread problem, which is the lack of transmission of Romani. So that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that with us. Our final intervention will be from Melinda Rezmovich, a scholar and language expert. Melinda's presentation will be on transmitting Romani language to children. I believe her presentation will be in Romani, so if the translator can be prepared to translate simultaneously into English, that would be great. And Melinda, please go ahead.
Va.
Diana, can you please? Okay. Melinda, can you try speaking up a little bit so that the translator can hear you?
Muri prezentația că tema site sadas mai dure romaneship amare ternenge. Pe cadi na jenaută până tu menge e că ferie creațarto savore che hanite kai besen roma si ver metodologia kai si ver rezultato. Mikela buti ando umbrico tem ande antropologia no ande kadala kalutne starbej kera puti ande ek shaoren boker ande ek cini kurgalin ando gav podas tai ande mori prezentația până tu menge mai anglar ek misal pe cadodrom amen sardas maidur e romanishib amare shavorenge. Kati andogav la biaras yek kutergi pedagogikanim metoda, kadi metoda lingras maidur katar morideis con kerdias yek romani kurdialin ando romano andadogav ando hodas ande romano talapo. Angaladi pajvadesh percența putergirească de kurdialin, cate le romane shavore shaiden az duma romanes ande kurdialin situanas romane paramit și romane poezii, tai catarcodisas putergica de kurdialin, que dei taiodad saco 10 ande shaijalas, canak von kamenas, tai dikenas pinge shavorem, deșenas lența, tai vivon krenas pen lența. Tai akanak para pajva de shabersha kadi metodologia yasperdal yek temutno sate pinaptumenge shavorengo ker kai akadak kerembuti ande dushela kera. Amen akanak mai pari situația si că akanak le romane shavore tai romane deja nabutamente vorbinen romanes. Akanak amen kodisi amari buti te dazlenzor tai motivația te vorbinen shavorența romanes. Anda kadi vi amen Andrea Karaslen ande romani kurdialin te den duma penge shavorența. Ande kodola kera kai si pat kurdialinja va školi kai si romane bučarne kai vorbine romani ship kodi ginira ke silashi situația te den duma le shavorența romanes. Ande kada si lashi situația ke si ek romano muzeum so kerbiom kai vi ande kada romano muzeum shaiden duma e cavresa Roma pe romaniship, kai si doi romane Hangeria, kai dicate shaiden duma romanes ande Hangera, kai kate shairudine romanes pe romaniship. Mai dur na poi ai venit să saripo manga, zumavau te grabara o texto te linkrave drama 5 minuta. E romaniship ande pare situația si. Că janaste parugasca do paripo, atos cavastosite avel amen e complexo metoda și baco plano, educația codichipo, că te janastosite avel, că te terdiol ande romane și bache hakayam. Bastosite di casui ande codolate familii, să ve vorbine romanes, să vi și blaviaren sacodes, să vi si emazirare, romanii pedagogicani. Ande familia pe comunicația, kai verber metoda sa la berenership, pe socializația podrom stradrupasi. Uieto sa riship si ede familia canagden duma e cabresa, ede taiodat. Edulto, sa riship alosarel ede taiodat canagduma del caringo shavoro. Trito, sabi ship alosarelo shavoro canacler dumate del de asta validadesa. Stato, sarde duma e cabresa edei taiodat. But vastusite di casca de la gruppi. E romani ship sardea ship. Mai angal di casca di situația. Codora familii sa vinuma romanes din duma e cabresa, kai tenge shavorența, codora manusha sa zorialipo, sa somnata ship. Von mai duramente dene romaniship per David Berșan. Ando hodas angaladi de șeberșența ias dome tendenția că sa cobeș baro codole terne romengo numero con naden per dale romaniship pa numațera la vasi keren le șavorența. Vasto se te dicaș și baki asimetria ande familia. Ande cadi situația sama șailas că edei taiodat mai butiva romanes din duma care de șavora, de codola a bagaje canes din duma parfale lenghe. Hajarele romaniship de nasicaven activitatea andola viaripo. Shai gindinas ke kadala shavora kanar barona nadena majdure romanishib benge shavorenge. Mashkale duye shibenge shavore abana ande kurdialin sama shailas che coviol ideea kishib ande școala cade situația inche mai fedel zurali kerdiol. Le shavore sar ande ușcaren ande kurdialin ande budaresco prago tugulte mukhene romanishib che naștig vorbine romanes. Bud putea ande kurdialin pe gajikene shiba sitjon. Tai vașa dizi khere gajikene scamente vorbine. Cadela sacamente paruven e familia che shiba ki norma savi penel che khere romanes vorbinen ya kavresa. So penel pe cade familia. Yek mukhente paruven romanishib de numai că e țara vremea, care si mai lași, doi, n-a numai pe țara vremea mukhen, care si mai nasul. Amaro dichivo kodosi kavel ke ande bute romane ke thanipe leterne romnia mukhente paruvel o shavoro eship khere. Mai lași si e situația ande kodola familii kai du trin generații ande yek peshen. Cade emami vadiopapu numai romanes vorbinele shavorența. Si te liperav kumenge che si e casavi grupa kai hamisabje shib si ande familia kana romani tai gaji kanes denduma. Si e casivi forma kana che romani shib feri odata e de vorbine. Cade ginilave mai nasul. Problema si e romani shib na mezilande educația. E educația na kamer sama perel che sosko baro barvaliposi ande romani shib. Ande kurdialin ta școala na kamen sama terene romani shib. Si ca sare situația kana kodola manusha con ande psihologia vagy ande specialno educația kerembuti pendente na la derene romani shib le shavore che shinelo drom katar lengo vojaveriko. E palutni tema skurtones kamavte kuna tumenge somange but vasnesi e shibaki revitalizația. E romani shib ande care situația si andacadi akanutni problema si te das duma pale shibaki revitalizația. Bud specialisti vorbinem pale shibaki revitalizația ta e tehnica ki relația. O internet, o telefon, jutir te situne romani shib, tai vasno si te das la nielizor, te sition bud gene paleș romanes, te namu kente hasadiole romani shib. Bud love tribunate das pe kodo, hogy mai zurales te dikas amare shib po internet, ande kadi situația kai bud gene nasvaiven ando COVID-19, epidemia, tribunas bud nieve digitale materiali po internet. Andar soste shai sitionas tai drabarenas vi romanes amare shavore. O Facebook, o Twitter, ando virtualo forma di caver tai si caver o jutipo, te shai situven vi romanes. Jutil te kerdiol, virtuale che tanipe savena un blanca caro geografica ne duripe. Canake romani ship si cardiolando digitalo luma, atos cacado di simboli cano manda ipodel ande shibaco prestigio. Vaše romani shibaco revitalizația așa das mai bud categorii pe ver niveli sar, familia, educația, sicaripe, media, virtualo, placo, jandricani manusha, shibake hakaya. E bachtai tailashi revitalizația ki metoda sava catare te hanipe bianjol. Cadela comanda i posibi kodo che le romen naștig distrasabri. Tai bi lengo nai slobodote lasciara se problema, janerte che vasno site mangas lengo ye khatariko. Nai sera kai shundeman, kai doshava kai kerdiam kado beshite, kumensa ketane.
Thank you so much, Melinda, for the presentation. Before I pass it over to the next panel, I just wanted to say that it seems like one of the common threads kind of emergent from this panel is that is the importance of technology in the future of the sort of transnational development of Romani. So I'd like to thank my distinguished panelists for their comments and pass the floor to Almir Husseini, the moderator for the final panel in today's conference. Thank you all very much.
Mišto avilen savoren, kate sam po rusitsko kanalo, kaj das duma romane. Magalte pnav da na istu menge, kaj avilen kate, te das duma talo mai importanto tema i kovasi avetnupe la edukaciako pali romaničib duimi biš kaj duimi tranda. Amenza si respectime experturia dai kai romanici, professoria, giornalisti, activistia, kai silen vari experienza. Akana akaravko panelo, rai Thomas Acton, rai Hristo Kiutiko, tai rai Gilda Horvat. Amen ca shuna kana trin prezentacji, palosai prezentacji si amen scurto discusia. Je kandara mare experturia kai tubu sadate avalcate ira idelia Grigore naštikavili. Ame janaz kai voi dela men supporto i faemen asul kai našti avili. Kana amaro primo expertu si orai Thomas Acton, profesoro kai o romane studie ki Universiteta Greenwich. Ora eu Acton prezentila menge andi tema o avetnupe la educația cu pal i romanicip. Rai Acton, sito ti vorba.
Nice to Perikarav. Yetisarman te nashtite dav duma romanes mai misto. Numa nalajav te probiserav. Sosta kaname beshav le romani asilentensa ande Anglia. Kai ciden duma angliske, ciden duma francisco, ciden duma nemski. Trubul te das duma kitane romanes. Te keren lenge politica, te keren penge applicatia. Nekin div te Romani gypsy zorele ande sa elumia. Kanatusan ande Czechia. Český jib utrudno. Kana ves ande Anglia, kana ves ande America. Český jib natrudno. Numa shaite vacares romanes, shaite des duma romanes ande sa elumia. Adies a me vacedem but generali pe. Me mangav te vacarav mai signo. Making div te na standardizatia, na harmonizatia kai butrudno, no numa convergencia. Te aven ketane but dialecta, dicasles ande Anglia, siemen ande Anglia, Roma aselente catar savori europaesca temenda. Ai dicaste rodaste hateren. Ai shai. So, memang rate se ande e Romani scola, ande avutnipe penes, avutnipe avelipe. So si trudno te silen Romani lila kesin bare. I making div me ashun dem o Kirill Kojanov. No ma making div te si akana si ande Europa ande Lumia ek dasta baro corpus Romani literatura. I making div te trubul te rodas e bari Romani lila kai shai te kamenlen e Romani studenta. Making div te uzor te kerel convergencia. Na acel le linguistic, na acel le linguisticenza, acel le poetenza. Si amen ande avutni beshe ande palane bershe, due bare Romani politike, o Rajko Duric, te sovel nešto, butugnes amente te na acela mensa, ai ek ave paro polete lexa manush, von si but avere, ai von lel lava Qatar but dialectura, lexa manush, kana o lexa manush, genel but Romani dialectura, ai kana dikel ande ek dialect ek lav ke kamel, lella. Numa kana ame dikis ande le poesia, hatiaras so ramol, soskato kerel amen te hatiaras nevi lava. Numa, me mangav te lav ek exempluria, Matthew Maximoff, me kerav share screen. Okay. Ja, de kes, so me mangav te kep. Me mangav te puchas, ande amare scola cae vena, sa te das te hatiaren le studente, codle pucipe, sosi dialect, sosi chib, sosi trudno. Ai mashka dialect ai chib, me anav ek ave concept, idiolect. Ai miro exempla si o Matteo Maximoff, Soramel o Matteo Maximoff. Naibu gene janen te kana o Matteo mangel te kerel domecipe ande o Biblia ande Saint Denis ande ek enya efter wadesh besh e kangari avel leske ai penel kana tu na keres buki le averenza ame mangas cris aglaltud te kerel buki levenza interes no cruz kana avilo numa ci avilo e avera sas e kanadske rom o gi modro ai laki gaji laki romni gaji ruth modro ai von kerde domecipe ai sas diwano ai von pende te o Maximoff Kerel u Porano testamento ande penge idiolect leski vorbensa ai Ruth kai modro Kerel ek dolmecipe ande jib kai savore calderashe romane shaite hatiren savore calderashe ai mechepe so kede o Matteo trobul te penav te of kede ek nevo testamente si amen les de hara des besh achel ande lesko soba cidel la averenge numa kerel codibuke shaite de cas o maximesco idiolect ande codo domecipe nashti soskato lesko biblia lascerelles o don kenrek tai avere linguisti. I see a mene e si lacido meci, my boots si lacido mecipe, acana trovulte lascerasles. Numa si do mecipe kai boot manasha kai te ateren. Numa si amen avea texto kata Maximoff. O Maximoff ande ek enya punch octobesh kerel ek roman ek novel ande franzusicip le prix de la liberté ai kere of kerel domecipe ande romani chib kai slutil ek enya efterwadesh tadui Besh. I of Bushel Putin Taveskepime. I Akana and the Anglia ame mangas te keras publicatia Daiglot and the Deutsche ba ek patrin Angliski ek patrin Romanes. Putin Taveskepine. I keras buki Matteo Maximoff Mediatek and de Paris te kerasles. Sarkodo text, si ando Maximovsko idiolect. Sas si dui copia and lumia. Mesi man si yek kai dia del mande exian de Paris exempluria. Shame kerav. Nai ande electronica system trubulte kerav copia Mary Vastensa. Okay. Okay. I mean, scheite de kes te si ande let's go idiolect. Per exempluria, Putin taveskepime. Olav Putin, my boot Romana penen pokin, pochin. Giacana with chi ashundem Putin. Numa, making div te sopislo o Matteo, ut zorolo si. Mai zorolo Katar o Francuski. And the Francuski jib si liberté, and the Romani jib si duilava. Skepime, tai slobodo. I won't say avera. And the Romani text, si mai boot complicatia, mai boot. Oh, nastete penaf. My boot. Ave lav. Si andet lecture esclavuria tai robimos. I robimos tai esclavuria nai sa yek. So me accepterav te andevramia kai avel Romani linguiste cam carena standardizatia te anen codle barolil te hariake chavenge. Trubul. Numa. Perves trubul te keral publicatia lesco originalno text. Making div convergencia avila. Catara e politica, catara le cangrienda, catara o neteo. Dicas neve masca temeski chib. Kai baravel. Sare dees baravel. Sa ande Anglia amedikes kai Shakespeare. Kerel boot baro le lava ande angliski chip. Nada ras convergencia. Yeah. Nada ras le dialecteski vonchisi jevindi historia. Nice to ke.
Nice to keep a prezentacija, da sam put informaciji čandipej, put idei, taro save šaj seklova. Da put i portanto kai i romani shipsi put dialectia i quasi parvari petaro tali romani ship i mai importante elemento tali romani cultura. Nice to ke avsasto. Cana siamen maroduto esperto rai Hristo Ključov, profesoro ki Universiteta Silestia i oraja Ključov kad je prezentacija andi tema o avetno pe Romane Čibijaku. Rai Ključov, dam tu ti vorba.
Tjoven bahtale Romalen, bahtalo tumenge e lumiako dives e Romane Čibijaku.
Ci ashunas?
Tjoven bahtale Romalen. Hello? Hello? Hello. Šunen man? Na šunelpes? Hello?
Šai desi prezentacija.
Hello? 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 Na šunelpes? What is the problem?
Šai desi prezentacija, a šunatut.
Šunen? Ok. Teoven bahtale romalen, teovel bahtali tumenge olumiaco dives e romani cibiache. Av dives mangate vorbi sarav pe avutno e romani cibiache, ai pe miribuki meso kerdem ande palotne tranda berș, sar te buhlaras, sar te keras mai barvali e romani cip, ai mai angla astardem te kerav buki andi Bulgaria, ai astardem te kerav buki e ciknore chavorensa, kai si yekbresh, duibresh, trimbresh, ai sar andoker ciclon, e romani gramatica sar e daendar, e dadendar, e mamendar, e papundar, ciclon i romani cip. Acaba kerdem palalmiri disertația, ca ramusardem la ando Universitetul, ando Amsterdam, ando Berș Ecmilia, Eniașel, Enia Vardeștai Pančto, pe lingvistică, pe psiholingvistică s-a smiri disertația. Ai palalestar canavilem palpale anti Bulgaria, stardem te kerav zurali buki mașcar romani grupa kai si anti Sofia, o kai vorbin o dialecto erlisco dialecto. Ai a clasas anglune rodimata anti Bulgaria kai sas kerde ciknore chavorensa. Ideea sas te sikavas kai eromane chave kanasilen yekbersh duibersh von ciclon e gramaticane categorie andari romanicip. Pe aia problematică ramusardem but articole, kerdem but prezentație pe internaționalne conferenție, ramusardem but, ai mai pale, mai dur, kerdem buki eke profesor casa andari America, kai la coanav si Jill de Villiers pe Theory of Mind, șaite pe nasandi romanicip, teoria pe godiache, ai acabasas andusavo berș, ai sar e romane chave, ciclon anafora andari romanicip, i pragmatica e romane cibiache. Ai kerdem but bare experimente anti Bulgaria, n-ai numai romane chavensa kai vorbin romanicip, novi romane chavensa kai vorbin i horahanicip. Ai calap rodimata sas angune rodimata pe psiholingvistica andi lumea, sostarnai sas aver gasave rodimata tesicaven andi save berș e chave ciclon acala mai cicne diferenție pe gramaticane categorie. Cana o chavo a chiarel cana penesleske cana keresle savare save perasa kai acaba si peras anai si serioso vareso ai cana e chave ciclon o i semantică e cibiache sar ciclon i semantică e cibiache andi romanicip. Vi pe aia problematică ramusardem but lilata, ai kerdem but prezentație, ai mai palutni tema pe savi kerdem buki, ai kerav buki profesor casa andari America, e gagiasa, Jill de Villiers, acabasi o pe acabasar e romane chave ciclon ai janen e gramaticane categorie canasilen star pan shovberș. Antipsiholingvistica penel pescai sacu ec chavo trebuie te ciclol mai pare gramaticane categorii gicopančto berș. No but gage kai si rasistoria penen kai e romane chave ni ciclon i romanicip. Nailen jangli pe sostarnai ga sa vi buki sar romanicip. I romanicip nai la gramatica. Akalestar budčave andi Evropa si bičalde andi specijalne škole. Budčave andi Slovakia, andi Čehija, andi Bulgarija, andi Srbija, penelenge kaj si nasvale, so starniđanen šukar i gađikanicip, no konik nidikel so Gianello Čavo, katari dajakiricip, katari romanicip, kanasiles Štarberš, Pančberš, Šovberš. Ai amesi kadam egađasa, kaj 80% katari romane Čave, kanasilen Pančberš, von Gianen mai pare gramaticane kategorii katari romanicip. Kerdam jek testo, bud baro, bud buhliardo testo, pe romanicip plasa, ai acavasas te dedicas sargianene Čave pucimata, cana pucese Čaves vare so sar conso querel, conso hal, po savo pucipe o Čaveo del atveto. Pavalestar kerdam vi duito testo sas pe acales sar e Čave gianen o pasivno verbo, shaite penes o grast chalavdas e jucles, no shai vite penes andi romanicip o jucel sas chalavdo e grastestar. Ai cana penes acales o Čavo so achiarel, concas chalavdas. Ai si o aver testo sas pe genetivo andi romanicip, ai cana penes e Čaves que e grastes siles ec balono, ai i gruvni sila ec ludugii, ai palalestar dices pucese Čaves sar capenes dui grasta sosilen, ai dui gruvnea sosilen, ai vi sasamen testo pe aspecto catari romanici biache po verbo, aspecto o verbosco aspecto, o vachto cataro verbo, ai sar keren, ai sar ciclon e Čave e neve navnia, navni si o noun and English, ai pašnavni si o adjective, cana ni Gianello Čavo, cana niciunda so Čavo acaia vorba. Ai vi sasamen iec testo pe te querel repetiția pe prepoziție, te querel pe sentenție. Acalabu kensa si cadam cai andi romanicip acala mai pare categorie catari gramatica ciclon pes gicopančto berš. 80% catare Čave ciclon acales ai o rodimos cai kerdam sas andi gasave temas ar e romani Čavensa mașcar 38 berš, andi Bulgaria, Macedonia, Croația, Serbia, ando Čeho, andi Slovakia, ando Švedo, andi Anglia, andi Rusia, tai ando Kipro. Acaba rodimos sas kerdo mai but sar Pančel Čavorensa, mașcar 38 berš, ai acala rezultate si cade amenge cai i romanicip nimerel, ai i romanicip ciclol peschere, catare daiata ai catare dada, no aver so trebui te querel pesai, aver so diclam cai et romane Čavenge trebui si gasave romane Čavricane lila, cai si ramosardean di romanicip, ai si cavene Čaves vari savo aspecto catari romani gramatica, vari savi gramaticani categoria, ai cote o Čavo cana idai odat cana ginele Čaves che o liloro, o Čavo shaite ciclol iec nevi gramaticani categoria mai loches ai mai sigo. Ai acaba
Naist che pe caia prezentația, n-am putut acti. Naist că dai pute formații tai CNDP, cumva so mai si importanto da educația romane Čavenge, si mai importanto pe acchiarare romanicip cu avet nu pe să sto naistuke i kana si amen o trito sperto i Gilda Horvat Irazutni Horvat kada prezentacija di teme romanicip ando online žurnalizmo taj socijalno medija. Torej Horvat, trito ti voda.
Nais tu ke almia, da nais tu menge Christo, da Thomas Ekton, pa kalker dana menge kod informacija ta input. Anglunes, kamaf, te penaf tu menge kekeraf svato andi Romani ship, da Anglunes kamaf te penaf soakana me penaf tu menge, kodo cijal contra academia, numa kamaf te shuva vexemico, mai but transgeneracionalno perspectiva pala mari discusia, que sasa me bare grammaticalno, detailno agis, da kamaf te shuva exemico perspectiva pala futura anda mari discusia. Anglunes, kamaf te penaf ke lushaf, da simbari baricani ca shai daf duma agis pala mari zurali ta puriani romani ship. Romanes si zurali ship. In natura amara shibaki si che cimerel. A me trainas amari ship trail. Dikenan di historia. Trainas sa yek sosikadasa menge historia. Na ferie natura. Angla kodo e kangera kamenaste mudare na mente amari ship. Angla kodo e kraya. Andi Spania shinenas e romane shiba. Kavorbinenas amari ship romanes tu mejanen kodo. Sayek a me trainas. Te palasos si amenko di romani shukar ship. Amari ship si kate te keras komunikacija. Te acharasamen yek manush e averes. Kodo instrumento amari ship trail si perdo traio. Te kodi ship parujol, it changes, it adapts. Kadesar parujol iluma, kadesar parujon e manusha, kadesar parujuvas ame rom. I ship parugilas andi historia te ajutilamen, kadesi in natura amara romana shibaki. Akademitsko diskusia pala chache hohavne dialectura, diskusia pala sosi chacherom, te sosinai, kokerel kodi diskusia ci achardas kanchi, kokerel kodi diskusia ci achardas amari natura, amari cultura, amare manusha. Cogito ergo sum. Sic lingua creatus est, et lingua mutare mundi. Latinum si shucar ship, si important no ship, ande universitetura, numa codi ship si muli. Kere pasha e manusha, andi conha conic civa carel latinum. I romani ship camel te trail, ande tomari conha tumaro ker, tumaro traio. Esciratora e poetura, e jornalistura e activistura o romano mishkimos. Tume, cha ceskerentesitia palamari ship sacoges, ande tumare productura, tumare textura, tumare svatura. Sacoges, tume shontraio, ande amari ship. Te lenza, codole manuscenza, trai amari ship. Acana ages ando presento vrama. Codo parugimos si amari natura, tai natura romana shibaki. Nasa quande amende rodel pescodrom po universiteto. Numa saco yek, tai saco yek site rodel pescodrom andi romani ship. Sa yek po universiteto vai kere. Na ando universiteto avela o tehara amaro shibako, numa mashkar manushende, mashkar amende, mashkar tumende. Ando nevo romano narrativo di casche a mesa bachtale che sia men bu dialectura. Te chica maste pagrasco do barbalimos, andi yek artificano dialecto. Koteka manusha keren buci, keren svato, keren informacija, keren gila, keren poesia, Keren activismo marempetecamente ande amari romani ship cotesio futuro romano shibaco. Dei natura catare amari ship site parujol. Ivrama parujol e manush parujon co parujol trai. Te codosi I conclusia namuri. Codosi I conclusia historiaco. Shunen. Canasitu men hango dentu mengindo. Romanes si saso romanum manush penel que si. Romanes si saso romanum manush va querer pes que shavorenza. Palacodo naro den oiec chacho romanes que codo querer segregația. Coșol diferenția pașame, co querer andamari ship iec instrumento segregațiache, codo cia chardas canci palamari ship, palamari natura romengi, que o traio si parugimos. Nos ar de treia mari ship. Gian tu mengi kere dai vorbinen romanes, tu mari shavorenza. Gian kere de canacijan en ship, si choni ship, dem bravo saco gesa mara shibake. Si charen averen ande amari ship, dem bravo amara shibake. E scientifica di quel para amari historia, numa tu mero male, tu me sono traio andi ship. Te ande du me traili ship ages, te ande shele version mai angle, na estumenge.
Na isto che razni Horvat, na isto che kai danament but informații, but informații kai trebute gandisava kotar. Na starienge, so desamen but jandipe, but prezentații, kai shai siklova but, kai delamen tukar feeling of the osek kai I romanichib trebute avel respectime, avel edukime amare shaurenge. I ghiate saite ramari shib javede ternenge so kaven ko avetnute na istumenge pare I kana mangavte da vi vorba I shelutnaki taro ERIAC mea jungha.
Thank you, Amir. It is a rather difficult situation to have a conference on Romani language. And just to make sure that we pay the greatest respect to the language, may I ask you to consider if any contributions were untold. If you would like to make a short contribution, let's say in Romani, you can now raise your hand or indicate this in the comments. Because I feel that this English that connects all of us perhaps influences us a little bit too much. So I wait until you consider this, and I'm looking at the chat. And if there is no further comments, then it is my task to say a few final words. First of all, it's very difficult because I believe we all feel rather humbled and, of course, inspired by the knowledge and the experience that we brought together today. As one of the hosts of today's conference, I can only speak from within ERIAC and share with you some of the ERIAC commitments that have distilled out of the recommendations, advice, program, activities that you have suggested, the theoretical considerations that you brought to the table today. What we can conclude is that for sure, ERIAC will continue building a close collaboration with the Council of Europe in its Roma language initiative to consider specific steps to take together for a longer term initiative
for the future of the preservation and education of Romani language. And this is also stipulated between the memorandum of between the ERIAC and the Council of Europe Memorandum of Understanding. Apart from the current initiative, which so many of you are already contributing to, which is the ERIAC Language Initiative, we continue to work towards respecting the European Charter for Regional and Minority Languages and delivering not just its policies, but actual impact. We see from today's conference that ERIAC must, in its reports, research and programming, continue to promote the Romani language as Europe's cultural heritage. We shall also contact and connect with all local members and partners to observe the inalienable and commonly recognized right to use the Romani minority language in the private and public life, as so many of you have pointed out today, for all members of the Roma minority. Respect for diversity is an ERIAC principle, an ERIAC founding principle. So ERIAC encourages and recognizes the diversity in the use of Romani language in speech and writing in public and private life of the community. We all saw today that we all have a commitment and we all shall take measures to use Romani language in public life with its campaigns, open calls, competitions and events, and many of you called attention to this today. We trust that the Council of Experts, you who came together and presented here at this conference today on International Roma Language Day, this day will serve the building of our common transnational Romani language together with ERIAC and the Council of Europe, and hopefully with the support of the University of Graz. So a gigantic thank you, nice tuke, to all of you who contributed today, primarily to the host institutions and partners, the Council of Europe, especially Snezana Samardzic-Markovic, Director General of the DG Democracy, who encouraged calling this conference to life, and also both the Council of Europe, Joren Schoppenbroek, Director of Anti-Discrimination from the Council of Europe, and Dieter Halvax, and the Plurilingualism Research Unit of the Graz University, who supported calling this conference to life today. Of course, to all contributors and all the support deserves a gigantic thank you, especially the Roma and Travelers team of the Council of Europe, who helped the ERIAC team and the delegated experts do their best today and perform their best today here at the conference. And finally, we also need to recognize the ERIAC team who supported the organization, Mihaela Țatreanu for organizing the conference with the support of Agota Szilágyi, Andrea Petrus for the technicalities and her expertise, and Deputy Director Anna Mirga, who also managed the organization and diplomacy behind this complex event. Thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate your support. And this is, of course, not a first conference, just an occasion for us to gather, and many events shall follow, as I refer to the experts here as the Council of Experts to continue the work together towards the transnational Romani language. Thank you. And goodbye.